She scrubbed the floors of a man who made kings kneel and never once thought he noticed her. Then the night came when someone decided she was the perfect way to send him a message. They almost killed her. And when Alessandro Vitale found out, the entire underworld learned what happened to anyone foolish enough to touch what was his. This is Lauren Carter's story. Stay until the end, because the girl who tried to disappear is about to become impossible to ignore. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came down hard on Manhattan that Tuesday night. The kind of rain that didn't bother with warning, that arrived in sheets and curtains and made the city look like it was dissolving at the edges. The kind of rain that made sensible people stay inside. Lauren Carter was not inside. She walked with her head down, her collar pulled up against the wet, her sneakers soaked through to the socks within the first block. The number 6 train would have been faster, but the fare was $2.50 she hadn't budgeted for tonight. And Lauren Carter had learned long ago that every dollar had a conversation she needed to have with it before it left her wallet. So she walked. 42 blocks in the rain because that was what survival looked like sometimes. Wet and cold and unglamorous, with blisters forming on your left heel and your uniform still faintly smelling of the lemon polish you'd used on the mahogany banisters of a home that cost more than your entire life. The Vitale mansion on East 73rd Street was not technically a mansion in the way that word conjured images of sprawling estates and circular driveways. It was a townhouse, 5 stories of pre-war limestone that had been renovated twice in the last decade, with interiors that somehow managed to be simultaneously austere and magnificent. Lauren had worked there for 11 months. She knew every room, every surface, every corner where dust liked to hide, and every window that stuck when it rained. She knew which of the household staff you could talk to and which ones kept records of conversations. She knew that the kitchen floor required 2 passes with the mop, not 1, or you'd see the streaks in the morning light. What Lauren Carter did not know, what she had been very deliberate about not learning, was exactly what Alessandro Vitale did that made men lower their eyes when he walked into a room. She had theories. Everyone who worked in the house had theories. But theories required conversation, and conversation required presence. And presence was the one thing Lauren had worked very hard to eliminate from her professional existence. She was the housekeeper. She was the woman who made things clean and orderly and invisible in their perfection. She arrived before the household woke, and she left after it settled. She did not linger. She did not engage. She did not make herself memorable. It was a skill she had developed long before she started working for Alessandro Vitale. Invisibility was something Lauren had been practicing since she was 9 years old, when her mother's illness first made their home a place of hushed voices and careful movements. When Lauren had learned that the best way to help was to need nothing, to ask for nothing, to make herself as small and as quiet as possible, so that whatever finite energy existed in their small world could be directed toward more important things. Her mother had been sick for 7 years before she died. 7 years of specialist appointments and medication adjustments and hospital stays that Lauren had navigated like a navigator charting waters she hadn't chosen, steadily, quietly, doing what needed to be done. Her mother had died 18 months ago, in February, in a hospital room with pale green walls and the sound of machines, and Lauren had held her hand and talked to her softly until she stopped breathing, and then she had gone to the nurse's station and said, very clearly, "I think she's gone," and then she had excused herself to find a bathroom where she could sit on the floor for 4 minutes before pulling herself back together. The medical debt was $412,000. Lauren had opened the final accounting on a Wednesday morning with a cup of coffee she hadn't been able to taste, and she had sat with that number until it stopped feeling like an emergency and started feeling like a landscape, something she lived inside of now, a fact of her geography. She'd hired a debt counselor. She'd restructured what could be restructured. She'd taken the job at the Vitale household because the pay was exceptional, more than double what she'd made at the hotel cleaning service before, and because they required a woman who was thorough and discreet and who asked no questions. Lauren Carter could be all three of those things in her sleep. She turned off Fifth Avenue onto a side street that cut 2 blocks off her walk home, the rain hammering the pavement around her, little rivers running along the gutters and carrying cigarette butts and candy wrappers toward the drains. Her breath fogged in the cold air. Her hands were numb inside her jacket pockets. She'd forgotten her gloves again, which meant she'd probably find them in exactly the pocket she was checking on her next day off. She was thinking about the left side of the 4th floor bathroom that she'd noticed was developing a grout issue, and whether she should bring it to the household manager's attention or just deal with it directly with the grout pen she kept in her supplies bag when the 2 men stepped out of the alley. She heard them before she fully registered what was happening. A shuffle of feet on wet pavement, a sound that didn't fit the pattern of the rain, and her own footsteps. She looked up and saw them blocking the sidewalk ahead, 2 men in dark clothing, faces partially obscured by hoods, standing with a specific kind of stillness that Lauren's body understood before her mind did. Her feet stopped without her consciously deciding to stop. Walk back. The thought arrived clean and urgent. Turn around and walk. Hey. The taller one spoke first. His voice was flat, almost bored. The Vitale house. You work there. It wasn't a question, it was identification. And the way he said it, the particular flatness, the precision, made Lauren's stomach drop through the wet pavement beneath her feet. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. She was already calculating backward, how far to the corner she'd just turned, whether there were lights, whether the cross street had been empty when she'd passed it. Your uniform, the shorter one said. He moved sideways, casually, in a way that was not casual at all. Positioning. The logo, little crest on the collar. Lauren's hand went reflexively to her collar. The household staff wore a discreet embroidered crest on their work uniforms. She'd never thought of it as identifying her beyond the household itself. She thought of it now with a sudden horrified clarity. Tell Vitale, the taller man said. And now there was something different in his voice, a shift from flat to deliberate, like someone reading a prepared statement, that the Rivera operation doesn't recognize his claim on the north side. Tell him the meeting he refused had consequences. I'm just a housekeeper, Lauren said. I clean. I don't deliver messages. You'll deliver this one. The first hit came from the side. The shorter man had moved while the taller one was talking, and Lauren didn't see it until the pain exploded through her left side. She went down on one knee on the wet pavement, gasping, her hands hitting the ground and scraping against the concrete. The rain was very loud suddenly, and the world tilted hard to the right. She tried to get up. That was the thing she would remember most clearly afterward, that her first instinct, even in those first seconds of pain, was to get up, to stand back up and keep moving. It was so deeply habitual, that reflex, the body following the long instruction of her life. She didn't make it upright before the second blow landed, a kick to her right side that flipped her perspective entirely, that turned the world sideways and made the wet pavement suddenly her horizon line. She heard her own cry like it was coming from somewhere else, from a different woman in a different alley, too far away for her to reach. Make sure he gets the message, the taller man said, somewhere above her. Then they were gone. Just gone. The way that people could be gone in a city. There and then not there, the night folding around their absence. Lauren lay on the wet sidewalk for a moment that felt very long and was probably only 15 seconds. The rain hit her face and her upturned cheek and pooled in the curve of her ear. Her left side screamed with every breath. Her hands were bleeding from the pavement scrape, the red diluting pink in the rain. Get up. She got up. It took 2 attempts and the help of a wall and a sound she made that she would prefer not to remember. But she got up. She stood on the wet sidewalk in the rain and pressed her right arm against her left side and breathed through her nose, careful, measured, the way she'd learned to breathe in hospital waiting rooms, in financial counselors' offices, in all the places where you had to be functional in the middle of something that was trying to undo you. She walked the remaining 21 blocks home. Her apartment was on the fourth floor of a building in East Harlem that had good bones and tired everything else. Tired carpets, tired pipes, tired elevator that she didn't trust and therefore never used. She climbed the 4 flights of stairs with one hand on the railing and the other pressed to her side, and she let herself into her apartment and stood in the dark hallway for a moment before she turned on the light. The apartment was small and extremely clean. Lauren's apartments were always extremely clean, which was perhaps an occupational hazard, or perhaps just her nature. She had never been able to fully determine which. The kitchen counter was clear except for a cutting board and a small succulent in a terracotta pot that she'd bought at a street fair because it seemed like a manageable living thing to keep alive. The living room had a couch, a bookshelf that was organized by subject, and then alphabetically within each section, and a lamp with a warm bulb because she'd read somewhere that warm light was better for evenings, and she'd applied this information with the same thoroughness she applied to everything. She went to the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror. The left side of her face was red and would be bruised by morning. Her lip was split. She hadn't felt that until she looked and saw the dried blood at the corner of her mouth. Her hands were raw from the pavement, the scrapes dark with embedded grit she would need to clean out carefully. And her left side, when she lifted her shirt with a movement that made her see briefly white at the edges of her vision. Her left side was already showing a bruise that spread across 2 ribs and was a color she associated with fruit going bad. She breathed, carefully, in through the nose. It hurt to breathe deeply. That was concerning. She stood there doing an inventory of her own body. With the detached attention she might give to a piece of furniture, she was assessing for damage, cataloging, noting, measuring severity against function. Could she move? Yes. Could she continue to move in the morning? Probably if she was careful. Did she need a hospital? She thought about the $412,000. She thought about her current insurance, which had a deductible that sat in her mind like a small stone in a shoe, always present, always uncomfortable. She thought about what a hospital visit would cost and what it would mean for the payment plan schedule she'd constructed with such careful architecture. She got the first aid kit from under the sink and cleaned her hands. She took 4 ibuprofen with a glass of water. She wrapped her left side in a compression bandage she kept in her kit. She had kept first aid kits since she was 14, since the first time she'd had to manage a medical situation alone in their apartment while her mother was too weak to help. She put on clean pajamas. She set her alarm for 5:15 because she was due at the Vitale household at 7, and she would need extra time to move more slowly than usual. She lay down on her bed, and in the dark, she stared at the ceiling and thought clearly and without self-pity about what had happened. 2 men. They'd recognized the household uniform. They had a name, Rivera. They wanted to send a message to Alessandro Vitale, and they had chosen her as their envelope. She thought about reporting it. She thought about going to the police, and then she thought about what that would mean, going on record, being questioned, possibly being connected to a household involved in criminal activity, possibly losing the job that was currently the only reason she could service her debt at all. She thought about telling the household manager and what that conversation would look like. She thought about telling Alessandro Vitale directly. That thought lasted approximately 2 seconds before she discarded it. She had spoken to Alessandro Vitale perhaps 4 times in 11 months, and each of those conversations had been brief, professional, and related entirely to household matters. He was not the kind of man you walked up to with personal problems. He was not the kind of man you walked up to at all, except when professional necessity required it, and even then you were brief and clear and you did not linger. It was an accident, she decided. I fell. I slipped on the wet pavement. The story was simple and it required nothing from anyone. She would wear her hair down tomorrow to obscure the bruising on her face. She would move carefully. She would do her job. Lauren Carter had been doing her job through worse than this. She had learned that survival was not a dramatic act, but a series of small decisions made clearly and without sentimentality. She made those decisions now, lying in her dark apartment with her ribs aching and the rain still hitting the window. And when she had finished making them, she closed her eyes. She was asleep in 4 minutes. That was also a skill, the ability to sleep when sleep was available, to not let anxiety steal the rest that the body needed to be functional. She had learned it during her mother's illness, during the years when rest was something she took in small packages because full nights of it were a luxury she couldn't always afford. The alarm would ring at 5:15. She would get up. She would go to work. The Vitale household ran with the precision of a much larger operation. There were 6 full-time staff members who worked in overlapping rotations. Marcus, the household manager, who was silver-haired and exact in the way of people who have spent decades managing things that couldn't afford to go wrong. Diane, the head chef, who treated the kitchen like a sovereign nation of which she was absolute ruler. 2 other housekeepers named Sophia and Ray, who were pleasant and professional, and who Lauren liked without knowing them especially well. And Thomas, Alessandro Vitale's personal assistant, who moved through the house like a man who had agreed to be in 10 places simultaneously and was honoring that agreement. And there was Lauren. Lauren, who was quiet and thorough and who had, over 11 months, become so reliably present and invisible that she suspected some members of the household had stopped consciously registering her existence, which was, she had decided long ago, precisely the correct professional outcome. She arrived at the service entrance at 6:52, 8 minutes early, which was her standard. She liked to be changed and set up before 7, before the house fully woke. The service entrance brought her through the kitchen, where Diane was already managing the morning in her efficient, territorial way. "Morning," Lauren said. "Morning," Diane said, not looking up from whatever she was doing with a pan that appeared to involve a great deal of focused attention. Lauren went to the staff room, hung her coat, changed into her work clothes, retrieved her supplies bag, and began her morning round of the ground floor. This was routine, the kind of routine that lived in the body rather than the mind, that she could complete while her attention was elsewhere. The brass handles on the front door, the marble in the entrance foyer, the arrangement of the flowers in the tall vases on either side of the main staircase, checking for wilting, removing spent blooms, ensuring the water was changed. Her left side was a steady, contained fire. She had taken 4 more ibuprofen that morning, calibrated carefully against what her liver could manage and what the pain required. She moved slowly when slow movement was possible and quickly when quick movement was required, and she breathed through the difficult moments and did not make sounds. She had been working for 1 hour and 20 minutes when she heard the footsteps on the main staircase. Alessandro Vitale was not a man who moved quietly, or rather, he moved with a kind of deliberate quietness that was more alarming than noise, because it suggested someone who had learned to control even the sound of their own presence. He was tall, with dark hair that he wore pushed back from his face, and he dressed in the way of someone for whom clothing was functional information, well-tailored, dark, precise. He was 41 years old, and he had the face of someone who had been handsome in his youth and had grown into something more interesting, all sharp planes and watchful dark eyes. Lauren had always found it easiest to think of him as part of the architecture, like the staircase or the door frames, a structural feature of the environment she maintained. It helped. She was on the east side of the entrance foyer, attending to the mirror there with a microfiber cloth when he reached the bottom of the stairs. She kept her head angled slightly away, hair down, face turned. She had measured this carefully in the bathroom mirror that morning. The way her hair fell would conceal most of the bruising if she stayed out of direct light. She had done her job in the less lit areas of each room when possible, working the perimeter, keeping to corners. She heard him stop. She kept polishing the mirror. "Miss Carter?" His voice was not loud. Alessandro Vitale rarely raised his voice. She had observed this in the past 11 months. He didn't need to. There was something in his voice's natural register that made volume unnecessary, a quality of inevitability that made you hear it regardless of the ambient sound around it. Mr. Vitale. She kept her posture even, turned just enough to be properly respectful and not enough to bring her face into full light. Good morning. Come here. 2 words. That was all. But there was something in the instruction that was not actually an instruction at all. It was more like a declaration of what was already going to happen, and Lauren found herself walking toward him with the cloth still in her hand before she had consciously decided to move. She stopped 3 feet away. His eyes were already on her face. She watched him look at her, watched the small, precise way he was taking inventory, his gaze moving from the split lip to the way she was holding herself slightly off-center, one arm angled against her body, the particular quality of care she was bringing to her breathing. He was quiet for a moment that lasted long enough to be uncomfortable. "What happened to your face?" he said. "I slipped on the pavement last night, sir. The rain—" "Stop." She stopped. One word, and something in her simply stopped. Not from fear, she would think later, but from the recognition that the word meant he already knew she was lying, and the lie had an expiration date that had passed sometime in the last 5 seconds. Alessandro Vitale looked at her for another moment. Then he said, "Put the cloth down." She set it on the hall table. "Turn this way." He indicated with 2 fingers, toward the window, toward the light. Lauren turned. The morning light came through the east-facing windows and fell across the left side of her face with complete and unmerciful accuracy. She stood in it and felt his gaze like a physical thing cataloging what was there. "How many of them?" he said. The question short-circuited the lie she'd been constructing. It was not what happened or tell me about your accident. It was how many of them, and it landed with the quiet precision of someone removing a floorboard she'd been standing on without her knowing. She looked at him. For the first time, perhaps, she really looked at him. Not the way she looked at architectural details and furniture and the work that needed to be done, but directly. His face was absolutely still. His eyes were focused and patient and very dark, and there was something behind them that was not warm exactly, but was not cold either. It was a contained thing, a held thing. "2," she said. Something moved in his face. It was small, a tightening around the jaw, a shift at the corner of his eyes. But Lauren had 11 months of practice observing the details of things, and she saw it. "Did they speak to you?" She hesitated. The hesitation was a mistake. She saw him note it. "Miss Carter." His voice was very even. "I need you to understand something. What you tell me, or do not tell me, in the next few minutes will determine how I respond to this. And how I respond has consequences beyond the 2 of you. So I need you to tell me what happened. All of it." Lauren looked at the window. She looked at the pale morning light on the clean limestone of the buildings across the street. She thought about the $412,000. She thought about the job and the payment schedule and the carefully constructed architecture of her survival. She thought about the men on the wet sidewalk and the sound one of them had made. Deliberate, prepared, reading from some internal script. Tell Vitale that the Rivera operation doesn't recognize his claim on the north side. She had not delivered that message. She had decided in her clean apartment on her careful bed that she would not deliver that message. That she would absorb this thing quietly and disappear back into her invisibility and let it be what it was, a piece of violence that had found her accidentally by virtue of a small embroidered crest on a collar, and that had nothing to do with her actual life. But Alessandro Vitale was looking at her with those patient dark eyes, and he had said how many of them before she told him there were any, which meant he had already read the situation more clearly than her prepared story could obscure. And there was something in his manner that was making her habitual invisibility feel less like a shield and more like a plan that had already failed. "They recognize the household uniform," she said. Her voice was flat and clean, the voice she used in clinical situations, in financial offices, in hospital corridors. "They had a message. They said—" She stopped. Started again. "They said to tell you that the Rivera operation doesn't recognize your claim on the north side. They said the meeting you refused had consequences. The silence that followed was very specific. Lauren had been in rooms where the air changed, hospitals, mostly, when news arrived that altered the atmosphere. This silence had a similar quality, not empty but charged, a held thing. And then they hit you, Alessandro said. Yes. Where? My left side, 2 ribs possibly, and my face. Possibly fractured? I don't know. His jaw moved slightly. Why didn't you... He stopped, looked at her with something she couldn't fully read. You walked home. Yes. 40-something blocks. She didn't ask how he knew where she lived. She had stopped being surprised by what people in his position knew 3 or 4 months into this job. Yes. And then you came to work today? Yes, sir. Another silence. He was still looking at her with that expression she couldn't categorize, the contained thing, the held thing. Then he turned slightly and said, in a voice that was calm and not loud at all, Thomas. Thomas appeared from the vicinity of the kitchen hallway with the speed of a person who had been within earshot for some time. Sir? Dr. Marchetti, I need him here in 30 minutes. Of course. Thomas was already moving. And get me the security footage from the East 73rd Side Street corridor going west, last night between 9 and 11. I'll have it in 15 minutes. Good. Alessandro looked at Lauren again. You're going to sit down. I have the second floor. Sit down, Miss Carter. She sat down. He indicated one of the chairs near the hall table, a wing chair upholstered in dark charcoal wool, and she sat in it, and the act of sitting, the release of weight from her standing posture, sent a cascade of pain through her left side that she managed with a careful exhalation that she kept quiet. Alessandro Vitale stood in the entrance foyer and looked at her, and she looked back at him. The morning light was very clear between them. You weren't going to tell me, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was more like an observation, the way you might note that the rain had come from the west rather than the east. A fact, catalogued. It didn't seem... She stopped, tried again. I didn't want to create a disruption. Something crossed his face then. She still couldn't name it precisely. It was there and then it wasn't, like weather. You were beaten by 2 men as a message intended for me, he said, and you were concerned about creating a disruption. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked to the window and stood with his back to her, his hands in his pockets, looking out at the morning street. His shoulders were very still. How long have you worked here? He said. 11 months. And in 11 months, have you ever asked me for anything? The question surprised her. She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think. No. Have you ever asked anyone in this household for anything? No. He turned back to face her. Why not? Lauren looked at him steadily. Because my job is to be useful, not to need things. Something happened in his face then, a small, complicated thing that she observed but did not know how to interpret. He looked at her for another moment, and then he said very quietly, I see. The doctor arrived in 27 minutes. Dr. Marchetti was a compact, precise man in his late 50s who carried his bag with the ease of someone accustomed to making house calls in unusual circumstances, and he examined Lauren in the sitting room off the main hallway with the professional thoroughness of someone being paid very well to be thorough. He confirmed 1 fractured rib on the left side and 2 heavily bruised. He cleaned and dressed her hands. He examined the bruising on her face and declared it significant and not structurally threatening. She needs rest, he told Alessandro, who was standing in the doorway. The rib will heal on its own if she doesn't stress it. 4 to 6 weeks of careful activity. She'll rest, Alessandro said. Lauren opened her mouth. She'll rest, he said again, and looked at her, and she closed her mouth. The security footage took 17 minutes to locate and compile. Lauren knew this because she sat in the wing chair with a cup of tea that someone had appeared with. She hadn't seen who. The tea had simply materialized on the table beside her the way things did in this household, and she listened to the quality of activity moving through the house around her. Focused, purposeful, the particular tempo of a machine that had been activated. She had been in this household for 11 months, and she had carefully, deliberately learned not to understand the machinery of it. She understood the domestic machinery, the rhythms of cleaning and cooking and the management of a complex physical space. She had not inquired into the other machinery. She had not wanted to. But sitting in the wing chair with her tea and her fractured rib, and the morning light moving across the foyer floor, Lauren Carter thought that perhaps not inquiring was a luxury she had been permitted to exercise because no one had needed her to inquire. And that night, on a wet sidewalk 42 blocks from where she sat now, that luxury had expired. Thomas came to find her at 9:45. "Mr. Vitale would like to see you in the study," he said. His voice was its usual professional neutral, but Lauren noticed that he looked at her face with something that was not quite professional neutral. "When you feel able." "Now is fine," she said. She rose carefully from the wing chair, carefully, but without letting the care show, which was getting slightly harder as the morning wore on and the ibuprofen metabolized, and followed Thomas up the main staircase to the third floor, where Alessandro Vitale's study occupied the full width of the front of the house. The study was a room she'd cleaned many times and never lingered in. It was large, lined on two walls with bookshelves that held an eclectic mix of titles she'd noted over 11 months. History, economics, several shelves of Italian literature, architecture, philosophy. The desk was a substantial piece of dark wood clear of clutter, which she respected. A man who kept a clear desk understood the relationship between space and thought. Alessandro was standing at the window when she entered. He turned when he heard her, and she saw that Thomas had followed her in and was standing near the door. And there was a laptop open on the desk showing a frozen frame of security footage. "Come and look at this," Alessandro said. She crossed to the desk. The footage was grainy, the way security footage from private cameras often was. Adequate resolution, the kind that captured information without revealing detail. She could see the street she'd walked down. She could see the two figures stepping from the alley. She could see herself stop. Watching herself from above and at an angle, Lauren felt something strange, a double vision, the memory of the interior experience overlaid on this exterior image. The woman in the footage was small in the frame, composed, holding still in a way that looked like control, but was, Lauren knew, the stillness of someone calculating options. These two. Alessandro reached past her and tapped the screen. His proximity was not uncomfortable, she noticed. He maintained a precise physical boundary, close enough to point, but not close enough to impose. "Do you recognize them?" "No." "You're certain?" "I've never seen them before last night." He straightened, looked at the frozen image. "They're Rivera's men. Miguel Rivera. He runs the east side of Spanish Harlem, and he's been testing edges for the last 3 months. He arranged a meeting through intermediaries in September. I declined." Lauren listened to this. She was not sure why he was telling her this. She filed it carefully, the way she filed everything. "The assault was his response to my refusal," Alessandro continued. "It was meant as a demonstration that my reach had limits, that I couldn't protect even the people directly associated with my household." "I see," Lauren said. He turned to look at her. "Does that make sense to you, the logic of it?" "Yes. It's a way of establishing leverage without direct confrontation. Create a vulnerability. Demonstrate you can access it." Something shifted in his expression. He looked at her as if she had said something unexpected. "Yes, that's exactly right." "It's how hospitals negotiate," Lauren said. "Not the same stakes, but the underlying logic is similar. You demonstrate you can cause pain without going to war. You force the other party to choose between capitulation and escalation. You understand that model, he said. I've had some experience with large institutions that have more power than I do, she said. You learn to read the pattern. He was quiet for a moment. Looking at her with that expression, she was still learning to read. The contained thing, the watchful thing. Then he said, "The men who did this, I need you to know what I'm going to do." "You don't need to tell me," Lauren said. "I know I don't need to," he said. "I'm telling you because they used you. You were used as an instrument of someone else's agenda without your consent and without any regard for your safety. And whatever I do in response, you should know that it is a response to that you're part of the accounting." Lauren looked at him. She was genuinely uncertain in this moment what to do with what she was hearing. In 11 months of careful invisibility, in 11 months of being the housekeeper who was seen only when something needed cleaning, no one had ever told her she was part of the accounting. No one had ever structured a conversation around her specific position in an event. She had been peripheral. She had practiced being peripheral. "They'll be found," Alessandro said. "They'll be brought here, and they'll understand, in a way they won't forget, what happens when someone from this household is harmed." "And Miguel Rivera?" she said. He looked at her. Something that might have been appreciation moved briefly in his face. "Rivera will receive a message," he said. "A clearer one than the one he sent me." Lauren nodded. She understood that she was not supposed to know more than this, and she found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she didn't want to know more than this. She had, in her capacity as housekeeper, spent 11 months in proximity to a world she had been very careful not to see. She was aware, in the abstract way you were aware of weather systems in distant states, that Alessandro Vitale was a powerful and dangerous man. That the household she maintained was the domestic face of something much larger and less visible. She had chosen to see only the domestic face, not from naivety, but from the same deliberate economy that governed the rest of her choices. She took what was useful and left the rest. She was beginning to understand that this economy, like all her carefully structured systems, had a point at which it encountered the world and required renegotiation. "Sit down," Alessandro said again. He moved toward the chair on her side of the desk, and she realized, with a small internal adjustment, that he was pulling it out for her. Not with ceremony, just practically, efficiently, because she was standing and she should be sitting. She sat. He sat across from her behind the desk and leaned back in his chair with the ease of someone completely at home in a position of authority and said, "Tell me about the debt." Lauren stilled. It was a very small stillness, just a moment's arrest of motion, but his eyes caught it. "I know you have significant medical debt," he said. "It's part of your employment record. I review the records of everyone who works in this house." Of course he did. Lauren filed this without surprise. "It's being managed," she said. "Is it?" "Yes." He looked at her with that patient attention. "How much?" She told him. She had learned that there was a specific tone to deploy with that number. Matter of fact, clinical, the tone of someone presenting a statistic rather than a wound. She deployed it now. Alessandro absorbed the number with no change in expression, which she appreciated. People who reacted visibly to the number were, she had found, less useful than people who received it steadily. "Your mother," he said. "She was ill for 7 years. And you managed it alone." It wasn't quite a question. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Outside the study windows, Manhattan was doing its perpetual business, taxis and delivery trucks, and the thousand sounds of a city that never reached full silence. Lauren looked at the clear surface of his desk. There was a pen placed at the exact angle that suggested it had been set down with intention rather than negligence. The same care with surface and detail that she would have noticed in a room she was preparing to clean. She found this inexplicably, slightly calming. "You've been working here for 11 months, he said, and you've never taken a sick day." "No." "Never asked for an advance?" "No." "Never asked for anything?" "No." He looked at her steadily. "And you were going to let 2 fractured ribs go unreported because you were worried about being a disruption." The way he stated it, not with anger or exasperation, but with a kind of precise clarity, the way you might state a mathematical proof, made Lauren see her own logic from the outside for a moment. It was a strange sensation. It seemed manageable, she said, and heard for the first time how that sounded, how the sentence carried within it the entire architecture of her life for the past 7 years. Her mother's illness, the debt, the careful systems, the invisibility, all of it compressed into 3 words that were technically accurate and completely inadequate. Alessandro looked at her for a moment longer. Then he said very quietly, "You're the most efficient person in this household, Miss Carter. Do you know what I've been doing for 11 months every morning when I come downstairs?" She didn't know what she expected him to say. She didn't answer. "I've been noticing the work," he said, "the way things are organized, the way the space functions better after you've attended to it, the way things that need to be fixed get fixed before I notice they needed fixing." He paused. "I notice thoroughness. I have always noticed it. It's a quality I require in the people around me." Another pause. "I should have told you sooner." Lauren looked at him. The morning light was in the room in a different angle now, having moved with the sun, and it fell across the desk between them in a long, warm bar that divided the space into 2 territories. "You didn't need to," she said. "That's not the same as not wanting to," he said, and there it was. The thing that shifted, quietly, in the architecture of the room and in the conversation and in Lauren Carter's carefully maintained geography of what she expected from the world. It was small. It might have been nothing, but Lauren had spent a great deal of her life in the practice of noticing small things, and she noticed this one. She did not know what to do with it. She filed it carefully, the way she filed things that required more time before they could be properly categorized. "You need to rest," he said. "The doctor's instructions stand. The 2nd floor will survive. The grout on the 4th floor bathroom will also survive," he said, "and will be there when you're able to address it." Lauren looked at him. "I don't rest especially well," she said. It came out before she'd fully considered it, a piece of honest information given without calculation. He looked at her with what might have been the beginning of something that wasn't quite a smile, but was in that direction. "I'll have the housekeeper's room on the 2nd floor made up for you," he said. "You'll stay here until the rib is stable." "That's not—" "You were assaulted 42 blocks from here because of who you work for," he said. It was very simple, very flat. "You'll stay where I can ensure it doesn't happen again." Lauren looked at him. She thought about her apartment, the clean kitchen, the succulent, the bookshelf organized alphabetically within subject. She thought about the 4 flights of stairs. "All right," she said. He nodded once, as if this had been a logistical matter that had now been resolved. He turned back to the laptop and the frozen footage, and Lauren understood that the conversation was finished, that he had said what he needed to say and heard what he needed to hear, and the rest was going to be action. She rose from the chair, carefully, and moved toward the door. "Miss Carter." She turned. He was looking at the screen, not at her. "They used you because they thought you were invisible," he said. "They thought you were a background detail. A messenger pigeon wearing a crest." She waited. He looked up at her then. His eyes were very direct. "You are not a background detail." Lauren Carter stood in the doorway of Alessandro Vitale's study, with a fractured rib and scraped hands and a bruise that was still deepening on the left side of her face, and felt something shift, not dramatically, not with any of the fanfare that shifts in stories were supposed to have, but with the quiet, specific weight of something that had been in one position for a long time finally being moved. "I'll remember that," she said. She went down the hall. Behind her, she heard Alessandro Vitale pick up his phone and make a call, and his voice in that conversation was very quiet and very even, and it was nothing like the voice he had used with her. Outside the Vitale mansion on East 73rd Street, Manhattan continued its thousand purposes. But inside the house, in the careful geometry of rooms that Lauren Carter had spent 11 months maintaining, something had changed. She could not have said exactly what it was, or exactly when it had begun. She only knew that the woman who had walked into the study this morning was not quite the same woman who walked back out into the hallway. And somewhere in the city, in locations she did not know and would not ask about, the machinery had been set in motion. The night that was coming would be a reckoning, and Lauren Carter, who had spent her life practicing invisibility, had become the reason for it. The housekeeper's room on the second floor had not been used in some time. Lauren could tell this the way she could tell most things about a room, from the particular quality of the stillness in it, from the slight mustiness of air that had been sitting undisturbed, from the thin layer of dust on the windowsill that told her it had been weeks, maybe months, since anyone had opened it properly. It was a good-sized room for what it was, a single bed with a dark headboard, a wardrobe, a writing desk beneath the window, a private bathroom through a narrow door on the left. Functional, precise, the kind of room that had been furnished without sentiment but not without care. Sophia had made the bed up in fresh linens, and someone, Thomas most likely, had brought a small arrangement of white flowers in a glass vase and placed them on the writing desk with the kind of understated thoughtfulness that suggested it had been done on specific instruction. Lauren stood in the doorway for a moment, her supplies bag still over her shoulder from the morning she had not been allowed to finish, and she looked at the room and thought about what it meant to be inside the house, rather than moving through it. She had always moved through this house. That had been the point, to pass through spaces and leave them better than she found them, and to leave no other trace. The room, with its made bed and its white flowers, was asking something different of her. It was asking her to be still inside it, to take up space. Lauren set her bag on the writing desk and sat on the edge of the bed and breathed carefully, and let herself acknowledge for the first time since the night before that she was tired. Not the ordinary tired of a long shift, the deeper tired of someone who had spent 14 hours managing pain with the top half of her attention while the bottom half ran the logistics of survival. The tired that lived in the bones. She lay back on the bed without removing her shoes, staring at the ceiling, which was smooth and white and clean. And she thought about Alessandro Vitale saying, "You are not a background detail," in that flat, direct voice. And she thought about how strange it was to be told a thing like that, to have someone look at you and say, with complete authority, that you existed. She was asleep in 6 minutes. She did not wake until 3 in the afternoon. The house had a different quality in the afternoon. Lower light, longer shadows, the kind of quiet that followed a day of contained activity. Lauren woke to the sound of traffic 3 floors below and spent a moment reconstructing where she was and why, which was a longer process than it usually was in the mornings when her own apartment provided consistent contextual information. She sat up. Her ribs informed her immediately that the morning's events had occurred, with a sharpness that was less surprising than it might have been. She breathed through it, stood, went to the small bathroom and washed her face with cold water, and looked at herself in the mirror. The bruise had deepened to purple-green on her cheekbone. The split lip was swollen, and she looked objectively like someone had hit her, which was accurate information she had no particular use for. She changed her shirt. She kept a spare in her supplies bag, a habit from years of work that might encounter any variety of spills and stains, and opened the door of the housekeeper's room. The hallway was quiet. She could hear, distantly, the sound of the kitchen in its afternoon mode. Diane's terrain, the prep work for dinner, the particular rhythm of chopping, and the occasional clatter that meant something was being moved between the stovetop and the counter. Lauren stood in the hallway for a moment, feeling the peculiar displacement of being in the house without a task. She did not know what to do without a task. She had been, for as long as she could usefully remember, in the process of doing something. Even rest, in her life, had a productive quality to it. She rested in order to be functional, the way you recharged a tool in order to use it. The idea of simply existing in a space, without purpose, without direction, without the organizing principle of work, it created a specific kind of discomfort that she didn't entirely know how to address. She went to the library. The library was on the second floor at the back of the house, a room she cleaned weekly and had always moved through with particular attention because the books required a different kind of care than surfaces. Dust on books was insidious, working into the spines and the pages. She had developed, over 11 months, a quiet affection for the room without ever allowing herself to sit in it. She sat in it now in one of the two reading chairs near the window and looked at the shelves. She was reading the spines, a habit, organizing information she didn't need in the way that her mind organized information when it didn't have a task. When the door opened, Alessandro Vitale had changed from his morning clothes into something that was still dark and precise but different. A lighter shirt, no jacket, the sleeves rolled to the forearm in a way that suggested the afternoon had been working rather than formal. He stopped when he saw her, not with surprise exactly, more with the brief recalibration of someone who had come looking for something and found something else in its place. "Sleeping finished," Lauren said. It came out slightly more direct than she'd intended. "Good." He came into the room. The library was not a small room, but his presence had a quality of density that made spaces feel more populated than they were. He went to the shelves on the far wall, ran a finger along a row of spines, selected a book with the ease of someone who knew exactly where it was. Then he turned and looked at the chair she was in. "That's yours?" she asked. "It's a chair," he said. "It doesn't have preferences." He took the other one, across the reading table from her, and sat with the ease she had noticed in the study, complete comfort with his own occupancy of space. He set the book on the table but didn't open it, and looked at her across the room's afternoon light. "How's the rib?" he asked. "Present," she said. "Functional?" "Marchetti left instructions for pain management. Thomas left them on your desk." "I saw them." She had found the folded paper when she'd gone back to the room, precise, clear instructions in a doctor's handwriting that told her nothing she hadn't already calibrated herself, but that she had read carefully anyway because careful reading was its own form of respect. "Thank you." He looked at her steadily. "You don't say that often." "Thank you?" "Yes." She thought about that. It was true, she supposed. Gratitude required an acknowledgement of having received something, and receiving things had not been a large feature of her landscape for quite some time. "No," she said. "I don't." "Why not?" It was a direct question, and he asked it with the directness she was beginning to recognize as his particular register. Not aggressive, not probing, just efficient. He wanted information. He asked for it. The simplicity of it was something she found, despite herself, slightly refreshing. "It's easier not to need things," she said. "And if you don't need things, you don't receive things, and therefore gratitude doesn't come up very often." "That's a very efficient system," he said. "Yes, and a very lonely one." Lauren looked at him. He was looking at the window, not at her, having delivered this observation with the same flat precision he applied to all his statements, as if the emotional content of a thing was simply more information, to be conveyed accurately and without ornament. "It's practical," she said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive," he said. He turned back to her. "You can be practical and lonely at the same time. Most people are." She did not know what to say to that. She looked at the book he'd set on the table. She could read the spine from her chair. Marcus Aurelius. Meditations. She had read it herself years ago in a hospital waiting room while her mother was in a procedure. "You're reading that?" she asked. He glanced at it. Rereading. It's useful to reread things when the circumstances change. The same text says different things at different points in your life. What's it saying now? He was quiet for a moment. That how you respond to what you cannot control is the only authority you actually have. He paused. I find that either very comforting or very irritating, depending on the day. What kind of day is today? He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved, just barely, in a direction that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. Irritating, he said, but improving. Lauren looked at the window. The afternoon light was getting the warm-edged quality of late day, the light that turned everything slightly golden and made rooms feel more interior, more bounded. She thought about the fact that she was sitting in Alessandro Vitale's library in his reading chair having a conversation about Marcus Aurelius with a fractured rib and a bruised face and no particular task to accomplish. And she thought about how completely this did not resemble any of the days she had planned for. She thought about the way her life had organized itself around its own necessity for so long, around the debt and the work and the careful invisibility, and how those structures had felt permanent, geological, the kind of features you built your entire sense of direction around. And she thought about how strange it was that a Tuesday night's worth of violence could rearrange the furniture of your assumptions. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. The men last night, Rivera's men. She kept her voice clinical, the hospital corridor voice. What will happen to them? He looked at her with the assessment she was learning to recognize, the brief, precise gauge of how much she actually wanted to know. They'll be brought to account, he said. Here? In this house? A pause. Yes. I see. She filed this. And Rivera himself? Rivera will receive a communication that makes the cost of this calculation very clear to him. Will it be sufficient? He looked at her with something that was not quite surprise. You're asking if it will work, if it will actually deter him. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. She had the impression he was not accustomed to being asked operational questions by his household staff and was deciding how he felt about it. It will work for a period of time, he said finally. Rivera is motivated by calculation. If the cost of an action exceeds its benefit, he recalculates. The communication will ensure he understands the cost. And if he doesn't recalculate, then the next communication will be more definitive. Lauren nodded. She understood that too. She thought of debt negotiators, of hospital billing departments, of the graduated escalation of institutional pressure. Different scale, same logic. Do you enjoy it? She asked. The power. The question came out before she'd fully run it through her judgment. It was the kind of question she did not ask. The kind of question that was too direct, too personal, that broke the professional boundary she had maintained for 11 months with the care of someone tending a fence along a cliff top. Alessandro looked at her. He did not look offended. He looked, if anything, interested. The way someone looked when they were asked a question that turned out to have more substance than its surface. Enjoy is the wrong word, he said, after a moment. I understand it. I'm good at it. Those aren't the same as enjoyment. He looked at the window. My father built this organization, this structure. I inherited it the way you inherit geography. You don't choose the landscape. You learn to navigate it. Do you want to navigate it? She asked. Or do you do it because it's what exists? He was quiet for longer this time. Outside the window, the light was shifting, the city settling into its late afternoon configuration. She had the sense of having asked something that went into him and was encountering something real in the process, rather than the smooth surface of a prepared answer. Both, he said, and sometimes neither. He paused. That probably isn't satisfying as an answer. It's an honest one, she said. I find honest answers more useful than satisfying ones. He looked at her again, and this time the expression was clearer. There was something in it that was appreciation, genuine and unguarded. and it lasted just long enough for her to see it before his face settled back into its more contained register. "You're a very unusual woman, Miss Carter," he said. "I'm a very practical woman," she said. "People sometimes confuse the two." "Yes," he said. "They do." A pause. "Lauren." She looked at him. "If we're going to have conversations like this," he said, "you should use my first name." She considered that. The weight of it. Not the word itself, but the renegotiation it represented. The shift in the coordinates of their interaction. She had spent 11 months maintaining a precise professional distance from every person in this house, and Alessandro Vitale in particular, with the careful energy of someone who understood that closeness was a kind of vulnerability, and vulnerability was a kind of cost she had not been able to afford. But she was sitting in his library with a fractured rib because of who she worked for, and he had said, "You are not a background detail." And he was sitting across from her with meditations on the table between them and the afternoon light in the room, and she thought about the economy of her life and whether the thing she was being offered here was actually a cost or actually something else. "Alessandro," she said. It felt like stepping onto a surface she wasn't certain would hold. It held. He nodded once. Something settled in the room. Mutt. She did not see him again until after 9. The intervening hours had their own texture. Diane had sent food up to the housekeeper's room with Ray, who left it at the door with a gentleness that suggested he knew not to make it a big occasion, and Lauren had eaten at the writing desk and looked out the window at the east side of the street and thought about the day in a way that was more retrospective than she usually allowed herself. She tended to face forward toward the next task, the next necessity. Looking backward required a stillness she rarely permitted. But tonight she sat at the desk and let the day arrange itself in her mind, and she thought about the library and about what honest answers were worth, and she thought about the machinery she had heard moving through the house all day. The low-voiced phone calls, Thomas's precise footsteps on the stairs, the occasional arrival of a car on the street below whose engine she had learned, over 11 months, to recognize as belonging to men who were not household staff. Something was coming. She could feel it in the house the way she could feel a grout problem in a bathroom, the texture of a surface that seemed normal but was not quite right beneath the attention. At 9:15 she heard it. She was at the window. She had been at the window for the past 20 minutes, watching the street with the particular restless attention of someone whose body needed to be still, but whose mind was not cooperating, when she heard the cars. Not the arrival of a single car, but several, close together, with the coordinated timing of a procedure rather than a coincidence. They came from the east and stopped in the service alley. She heard the doors. She heard distantly voices, too low to understand, but with the specific quality of voices giving and receiving precise instructions. She told herself to stay at the window, told herself that this was the part of the house she had spent 11 months carefully not engaging with, and that tonight was not the night to change that. She was in the hallway, moving toward the back staircase, before she had fully finished telling herself to stay. The back staircase was narrower than the main stairs, and descended to the service corridor that ran the length of the ground floor's rear half. Lauren had used it hundreds of times. It was the practical route for housekeeping, shorter and less in the way of the household's main traffic. She moved down it now, with her hand on the wall, breathing carefully, aware of her rib's objection, but not stopping for it. The study was at the front of the 3rd floor, but she knew that the door to Alessandro's study, when open, angled in a way that allowed sound to carry toward the back hall more than you'd expect. She had noticed this the same way she had noticed the grout issue and the east bathroom window that stuck, as a detail of the architecture filed without particular purpose. She did not go to the study. She stopped at the end of the service corridor, at the door that led to the main hall, and she stood there and she listened. The voices were clearer here. 2 voices she didn't know, lower, rougher, with an edge of controlled fear that she recognized from hospital situations. From the particular voice of someone who was in the presence of something they could not calculate their way out of. And Alessandro's voice, which was absolutely, almost forensically calm. Say it again, Alessandro said. The whole thing, from the beginning. A pause. Then one of the unfamiliar voices, with that careful, controlled fear quality. Rivera said to hit someone from the household. Make it visible. Make sure it got back to you. And the purpose. To show you that your people weren't untouchable. That he could... A pause. That your protection had limits. My protection, Alessandro said. Yes. Another silence. It had a weight to it that Lauren felt through the closed door. She works in my house, Alessandro said. She has worked in my house for 11 months. She is not a soldier. She is not a liability. She is a woman who goes home in the rain because she will not spend $250 on a fare she's budgeted against. The flatness in his voice was total. It was the flatness of something very hot that had been compressed to room temperature. And Rivera chose her as his envelope. No one spoke. He chose her, Alessandro said, because he thought she was nobody. He thought she was a uniform with a crest on the collar. He thought she was invisible. A pause. He was wrong. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Yes. The voice was very quiet. Tell him, Alessandro said, that I have a long memory. Tell him that everyone in my house is under my account. Tell him that the Northside discussion is closed, not deferred, closed. And tell him... His voice shifted, dropping half a register in a way that was somehow more alarming than a shout. That the next communication from his organization to mine will require him to make himself personally available to receive my response. Do you understand? Yes. Good. A pause. Then, quieter still, almost gentle in the way that very precise things can seem gentle in contrast to what surrounds them. Take them. Lauren heard movement, unhurried, organized. The sound of the room rearranging itself. Then footsteps, retreating. Then silence. She stood at the door for a moment longer than she should have. She knew she should go back up the stairs. She knew she had heard enough, more than enough, and that the correct action was the one she had been very good at for 11 months, to move away quietly and leave no trace. Instead, the door opened. Alessandro was on the other side of it. He did not look surprised to see her. He looked for one unguarded moment, like a man who had been doing a very hard thing and had just stopped. And in the stoppage was visible, not vulnerable, not diminished, but simply present in a way that the controlled surface did not usually permit. They looked at each other through the open door. How much did you hear? He asked. Enough, she said. He nodded. A single, slow nod. He looked at her face, the bruise, the split lip, still visible even in the corridor's lower light, and she watched something move in his expression that was not anger exactly, but was in the same country. Are you all right? He asked. The question was simple. She had been asked it before in various contexts, and had almost always answered yes, or I'm fine, or some other functional truth that addressed the question without engaging its actual territory. She had learned this the way she'd learned most of her coping mechanisms, as a practical solution to a recurring problem. She stood in the service corridor doorway and looked at Alessandro Vitale, who had spent the last several hours deploying the machinery of his world on her behalf, and she thought about what honest answers were worth. I don't know, she said. It was the most accurate thing she could say. Something in him eased slightly. Not the tension, which remained, but something beneath the tension. Come away from the corridor, he said. She stepped back, and he stepped through the door into the service hall, and he pulled the door closed behind him, and they stood in the narrow, plainly lit corridor together with the sounds of the house settling around them. I heard what you said, Lauren said. About her being nobody. The uniform with the crest. I know you heard. You said it differently than I expected. He looked at her. How did you expect me to say it? She thought about this carefully. I expected you to frame it as a violation of your authority, a challenge to your territory. I expected the anger to be about your position. And instead it sounded like you were angry because someone thought a person was nobody, she said. Because someone looked at a human being and saw only a message. She paused. That's a different kind of anger. Alessandro looked at her for a long moment. The corridor was quiet, lit by a single overhead fixture that gave everything a plain, undramatic quality. The quality of things seen without staging, without the rooms and the architecture and the formality of the house above. Yes, he said. It is. Were you? She asked. Were you angry because of your territory or because of her? He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, both. And then, fairly quickly, only the second. Lauren absorbed this. She thought about what that meant, the sequence of it, the way one thing had preceded another and then been replaced. She thought about what it said about a man that his first anger had been institutional and his deeper anger had been human, and she thought this was, in the accounting of a person's character, a meaningful piece of information. You should sleep, he said. I slept for 4 hours this afternoon. Your body is managing a fracture. It needs more than 4 hours. I'm aware of what my body needs. Then why are you standing in the service corridor at 9:30 at night? She looked at him. Because I heard the cars, she said, and I couldn't stay at the window. He looked back at her. The plain overhead light was doing something to his face that the more carefully managed light of the rest of the house didn't. It was making him more specific, less architectural. She could see the lines around his eyes, the particular set of his jaw, the thing behind his expression that was not performed. Lauren, he said. Yes. Go upstairs. His voice was quiet. Not a command, or not only a command. There was something else in it, a tone that was almost careful. The rest of tonight is handled. You don't need to stand watch. She stood there for a moment with the corridor's plain light between them, and she thought about standing watch, about how long she had done it, for her mother, for her debt, for her own survival, and about how strange it was to be told that tonight the watch was someone else's. All right, she said. She went up the back staircase. At the turn of the stairs, she stopped and looked back. He was still standing at the bottom, looking up at her, just for a moment, before he turned and walked back toward the front of the house. She watched him go, and then continued upward. The housekeeper's room was dark when she got back to it, except for the light coming in from the street through the curtains, the particular urban darkness of a Manhattan bedroom, full of ambient glow and the shapes of buildings across the way. Lauren sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the white flowers on the writing desk, barely visible in the low light. Someone had put them there on instruction. Alessandro had told someone to put flowers in the room. She had worked in this house for 11 months, and she had learned its operations and its rhythms and its surfaces, and she had never been on the receiving end of its consideration. It felt like a language she had known in her head but not in her body, suddenly embodied, and therefore strange, and therefore real. She thought about the conversation in the library, about meditations on the table and the afternoon light, and the question, "Do you enjoy it?" that she had asked without thinking, and his answer that had been honest in a way she hadn't expected. She thought about sitting in his chair and him sitting in the other one, and the peculiar ordinariness of two people talking across a table, the way it had felt, after a while, less like an exception to the rules of their interaction and more like a revision of them. She thought about her name, in his voice, Lauren. The first time he had used it, just that afternoon, but it felt like it had been longer, the way significant things sometimes stretched time around them. She lay back on the bed in her clothes, the city's ambient light in the room, and she thought about invisible things becoming visible, about how the process was not always dramatic but sometimes quiet, sometimes just the cumulative pressure of being seen accumulating until the person being seen could no longer perform their invisibility with complete conviction. She pressed her hand gently against her left side, the compression bandage there, the steady ache of the fracture. There it was. The wound that had opened this, the Tuesday night rain, and the two men in the alley, and the message she had tried to absorb quietly and carry alone. The way she had always carried things, alone and quietly, because that was what her life had required, and she had become expert at requirement. Alessandro Vitale had seen the damage she'd tried to hide in the first 20 seconds. He had looked at her in the entrance foyer and said how many of them before she'd opened her mouth with her prepared story, and the prepared story had failed on contact with his attention. She had spent 11 months practicing invisibility, and he had spent 11 months, she understood this now, in the dark room, looking at the ceiling, noticing her work. The thoroughness of her work, the careful intelligence of the way things were organized. He had said I should have told you sooner with the particular tone of someone correcting an error they regretted. Outside, Manhattan was doing what Manhattan did, perpetually, irreversibly, indifferent to the lives being reconstructed inside its buildings. Lauren listened to it and let herself be in the room, in the house, in this specific, unusual night, without reaching past it toward the management of the next day. She thought about what Alessandro had said in the service corridor. You don't need to stand watch. She had been standing watch, she realized, for so long, since she was 9 years old, since the first time her mother's illness had required it, that she had forgotten it was a choice and not a condition. She had forgotten that there was a version of existence in which someone else sometimes did the standing and you were allowed to set down the weight. She did not know what to do with being allowed to set down the weight. She suspected she would need some practice at it. The white flowers were pale shapes on the desk. The city was its own low music below. Lauren Carter lay in the room that someone had prepared for her with clean sheets and white flowers, and she breathed as carefully as her rib required, and she let the night hold what it was holding. She did not sleep for a long time, but that was all right. She was learning to let nights be what they were. 3 days passed in the strange, suspended quality of convalescence, time that was neither the structured time of work nor the free-fall time of crisis, but something in between, a kind of parenthesis in the normal grammar of a life. Lauren was not good at parentheses. She managed the first morning by doing what she could do without aggravating the rib, light tasks, the kind that required attention rather than physical effort. She reorganized the supply closet on the second floor, which had been developing an inefficiency in its shelving system that she had noticed 3 weeks earlier and not had time to address. She cataloged the linen inventory, which was overdue. She did these things quietly, in the margins of the household's activity, because doing nothing was not actually an option her body knew how to execute. Marcus found her in the supply closet at 10 in the morning and stood in the doorway with an expression that was professionally neutral but had something beneath it that was not entirely neutral. Mr. Vitale left instructions, he said. I know, Lauren said. She was reorganizing the shelf of cleaning concentrates by pH level, which was how they should have been organized from the beginning, so that you automatically reached for the correct product by the nature of what you were cleaning rather than having to read labels each time. I'm not lifting anything or straining. He said rest. This is rest. She placed a bottle with the deliberateness of someone making a philosophical point. My mind rests when my hands have something to do. This is a well-documented phenomenon. Marcus looked at the shelf she was reorganizing. He looked at her. He had been the household manager for 16 years, which meant he had navigated a great many situations that did not have obvious correct answers, and his face showed the particular equanimity of a man who had made peace with that fact. I'll tell him you're taking it easy, he said. That would be accurate, Lauren said. He left. She finished the shelf. By the second day, her presence in the house had begun to feel less like an exception and more like a fact. The way things became facts when you stopped negotiating with them and simply allowed them to exist. Sophia brought her tea in the afternoon without being asked, setting it on whatever surface was nearest with a small, friendly efficiency that did not require conversation. Ray, who had the afternoon shift that day, passed her in the corridor with a nod that contained within it the entire wordless transaction of two people who understood work and were comfortable in each other's proximity. The household had absorbed her differently now, not as the housekeeper who moved through it, but as a person who occupied it, and the adjustment was quieter than she would have expected. Alessandro she saw in pieces. A conversation at the end of the hallway, in the morning, brief and practical, about the fourth-floor bathroom grout that she had mentioned and that he had apparently instructed someone to look at. He appeared in the library in the late afternoon of the second day while she was reading. She had found a novel on the shelf she'd been meaning to read for 2 years and had allowed herself the specific luxury of beginning it. And he sat in the other chair without preamble and read his own book for an hour in a silence that was not uncomfortable. Not arranged. Just two people in a room with books, the afternoon doing its slow work on the light. She noticed things about him in this close proximity that she had not registered from the operational distance of her previous 11 months. The way he drank his coffee, black, too hot, in a way that suggested he was not actually tasting it, but using it as a functional mechanism. The way he read, which was with complete concentration, the kind of focus that excluded peripheral information, so that you could move in his vicinity without disturbing him. The way he looked out of windows, not casually, not absently, but with the specific attention of someone performing an assessment and doing it habitually, as reflex. She noticed also that he checked on her, not obtrusively. Alessandro Vitale did nothing obtrusively, but with the regularity of someone who had added an item to their monitoring list and was honoring that addition. A question about the rib in the morning. The appearance of Marchetti on the second afternoon for a brief follow-up examination that Lauren had not requested and that had clearly been arranged. The food that arrived at regular intervals, slightly more varied and slightly better than what she would have ordered for herself, which told her that someone had either guessed at her preferences or asked someone who might know them. She did not ask which. On the third morning, she woke before dawn and lay in the dark room and thought about going home. Not as escape. She was clear with herself about that. The housekeeper's room had become, in 3 days, something she was comfortable in, which surprised her. She had half expected to feel the confined restlessness of a person out of their correct context, but instead the room had assumed a quality of her occupancy. Her book on the desk, her extra clothes folded on the chair, her supplies bag in its corner. Small facts of her presence that the room had accepted without comment. But she thought about her apartment with the succulent and the alphabetically organized shelves, and the 4 flights of stairs that were hers to climb. And she thought about the fact that she had been in this house for 3 days on a basis that was neither employment nor friendship, nor anything else she had a clean word for. And she thought about the economy of things, about what it cost to receive what was being offered, and whether she could calculate the cost clearly enough to know if she could afford it. The complication was that she was no longer certain she was calculating correctly. Lauren Carter had always been a precise calculator. It was the skill that had carried her, through her mother's illness, through the debt, through 11 months of maintaining an existence that was structurally precarious but operationally stable, because she measured every input and output with the discipline of an engineer. She knew what things cost. She knew what she had and what she didn't. She knew, at any given point, exactly where she stood. She did not know, at 5:40 in the morning of her third day in the Vitale household's second-floor room, where she stood. And this was not, she suspected, a problem of insufficient information. It was a problem of a fundamentally different kind, the kind that didn't respond to more calculation but required something else. Something she was out of practice with. She got up, dressed in the half-dark, went to the window and looked out at the street below, where Manhattan in the pre-dawn hour had a different character than at any other time. Quieter, emptier, the pavement still wet from a night rain that she had heard against the window at 2 and again at 4. The street lamps were still lit. A cab moved through the intersection at the corner, unhurried. She had been attacked on a street like this 4 nights ago, in rain like this. She looked at the empty sidewalk and breathed carefully, and let herself feel the full weight of that, Not the clinical version she had been carrying, cataloged and managed, but the actual weight of it. Two men and the pavement and the particular helplessness of a body under impact. The rain on her cheek as she lay looking at the wrong horizon. She had gotten up. That was the thing. She had gotten up and walked 42 blocks and gone to sleep and set her alarm and come back to work. Because that was what she did. She got up, she kept going, she managed. It was her most fundamental operational principle, and she had never questioned whether it was also a limitation. Alessandro had said, "You don't need to stand watch." She was beginning to understand this was not just about one night. Eek. She found him in the kitchen at 6:15, which surprised her. She had not, in 11 months, seen Alessandro Vitale in the kitchen at 6 in the morning. The kitchen was Diane's territory, sovereign and inviolate, and the household's principal inhabitants respected this sovereignty with the consistency of people who understood which battles weren't worth having. But Diane didn't come in until 7, and at 6:15 the kitchen was empty except for Alessandro, who was standing at the counter in a dark sweater and reading something on his phone, with a coffee that he had clearly made himself in the plain, functional way of someone who could operate a coffee machine and did not require ceremony around it. He looked up when she came in. He took in the fact that she was dressed, that it was 6:15, and that she was moving with a slightly better quality than the previous mornings. The rib was healing, or at least asserting itself less aggressively, which amounted to the same thing for practical purposes. "You're up early," he said. "I couldn't sleep." She went to the coffee maker. She had operated it herself perhaps twice in 11 months, both times early, both times when she'd arrived before anyone else, and the kitchen had been empty, and the machine had been sitting there with the specific silent invitation of an unoccupied thing. She made herself a cup with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been making coffee in various machines for 20 years. She stood at the opposite counter and drank it. He put his phone down. The kitchen was quiet around them in the particular way of a large house before it wakes, a held breath. "How is the rib?" he asked. "Better," she said. "I'd like to go back to full duties." He looked at her. "Marchetti said a week minimum." "Marchetti is being conservative." "Marchetti is being a doctor." "I've had experience calibrating my own physical limitations," she said. "I'm confident I can manage a modified schedule." He looked at her for a moment. Then, "Why do you want to go back to work?" "Because it's my job." "That's the reason, not the why." She looked at him. It was 6:15 in the morning, and he was asking her precise philosophical questions about the difference between reasons and causes, which was, she thought, entirely consistent with what she had learned about him in 3 days of closer proximity. Alessandro Vitale did not ask the surface question when the deeper one was available. "Because I know how to be useful," she said. "And I don't know how to be anything else. And being something else for 4 days is more difficult than the fractured rib." He was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup on the counter, one slow rotation, a thinking gesture. "You said that with the clarity of someone who understands it's a problem," he said. "I understand it academically," she said. "That doesn't mean I know how to solve it." "What would solving it look like?" "I don't know." She looked at her coffee. "Learning to exist without a task, I suppose. Learning to be in a space without being in service to it." She paused. "It sounds simple when I say it out loud." "Simple things are often the hardest," he said. "The complicated things give you something to manage. The simple things just require you to be there." She looked at him. He was looking at his coffee, and in the kitchen's early light he had the quality she had seen in the service corridor, the specificity of a person without their staging, the sweater instead of the jacket, the unguarded morning face. She thought about the distance she had maintained for 11 months, and about how distance, like invisibility, was a practice that required constant renewal, and how the last 4 days had interrupted the practice long enough that restarting it would require a conscious effort she was not certain she wanted to make. "I've been thinking about going home," she said. It came out with the flatness of information rather than complaint. the way she delivered difficult data. He looked at her then, sharp and direct. The doctor. I know what the doctor said, she said. I'm telling you what I've been thinking, not what I've decided. He was quiet for a moment, processing this distinction. All right, he said. What have you been thinking? She set her coffee cup down, looked at the clear counter surface, granite, dark, maintained with a thoroughness that was her own doing from months of cleaning it. I've been thinking that I don't know what the terms of this are, she said. The staying, what it means, what I'm supposed to be here. She looked up at him. I'm a housekeeper. I understand that role. I know its boundaries and its requirements. This, she indicated the kitchen, the morning, the territory between them with a small gesture. I don't have a clear model for this. Alessandro looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression was doing what expressions did when they were deciding how honest to be. The brief interior consultation, the decision point. Neither do I, he said. She blinked. It was, she realized, not the answer she had expected. She had expected something managing, something that clarified the terms in a way that was practical and contained and that she could file cleanly. She had not expected him to match her uncertainty with his own. You've had people in this house before, she said. Staff, people who stayed. Yes. He looked at his cup. That's not what this is. She was quiet. I told you that you weren't a background detail, he said. I meant it as a statement of fact, a correction of something I should have said sooner. But since I said it, I've been thinking about what it actually means, what the logical implications of it are. He turned the cup again. You have been in this house for 11 months. In 11 months, I have never brought a conversation to you. I have never looked up from what I was doing and thought, I want to know what she thinks about this. Not because you weren't there, you were always there, but because I had decided, without examining the decision, that you existed in a separate category, domestic, background. Not, he stopped. Not real, Lauren said quietly. He looked at her. That's more brutal than how I would have said it. It's accurate. Yes, he said. It is. A pause. And then I saw what happened to your face. And I heard what you said in my study about hospitals and leverage, about debt negotiators, about the logic of institutions. And I sat across from you in the library and I thought, how did I spend 11 months not knowing this person was here? Lauren looked at the counter. She was very still. That question doesn't have a comfortable answer, Alessandro continued. The answer is that I didn't look. I had a category, and I put you in it, and I didn't look past the category. His voice was even, the way it was always even, but there was something beneath it now that was not managed. I'm looking now. The kitchen held the silence for a moment. Outside, the city was beginning its morning. The first sounds of trucks on the cross street, the specific quality of light that was becoming day rather than pre-dawn. That's a terrifying thing to say, Lauren said. I know, because it requires something back. Yes. She looked at him. She thought about her apartment and the 4 flights of stairs and the succulent and the alphabetical shelves, all the careful structures of a life organized around its own survival, beautiful in their precision, comprehensive in their loneliness. She thought about standing watch for 20 years and being told she didn't have to. She thought about what it cost, what it actually cost, in the full accounting, not the money cost, not the practical cost, but the deeper cost of letting someone look at you and not stepping sideways out of the looking. I need to know something, she said. Ask. The men last night, the night I stood in the corridor, what happened to them? He held her gaze steadily. They're alive, he said. They delivered Rivera's message. They'll continue delivering it to anyone who asks what happened when you cross a line in this organization. They won't be able to do anything else for a while, but they're alive. Why does that matter to you, that they're alive? He was quiet for a moment. Because dead men teach nothing. Living ones carry the lesson in their own bodies. He paused. And because I am not, he stopped, started again. I have inherited a world that runs on specific rules. I operate within those rules because the alternative is chaos that costs more lives than the rules do. But I choose, within those rules, what I'm willing to do and what I'm not. A pause. I am not willing to make corpses of men who are following orders from their own boss unless there is no other option. Lauren absorbed this. Rivera, she said. Is there another option with Rivera? There will be, Alessandro said. I have sent a message through the correct channels. He will receive it in a way that requires him to make a decision, to escalate or to stand down. Most men, when the cost becomes concrete and personal, stand down. And if he doesn't, then we have a different conversation, he said, but I give people the chance to choose correctly before I take the choice from them. Lauren looked at him. This was not the man she had constructed from 11 months of careful non-looking, not the architectural feature, the powerful structure she moved around without engaging. This was a person who had thoughts about the cost of violence and the preservation of lives and the difference between the rules he operated within and the choices he made inside them. This was someone who had complexity, the way real things had complexity, not in service of a narrative, but just because that was the nature of being a person in a difficult world. All right, she said. All right, what? All right, I'll stay. She picked up her coffee cup. For the rest of the week, until Marchetti clears me. She looked at him over the rim. But I want the fourth-floor bathroom. Something moved in his face. The corner of his mouth shifted in the direction that was adjacent to a smile, the same direction she had noticed in the library. The grout, he said. It's going to become a structural issue if it's left. Then by all means, he said. The grout is yours. She did the grout work that afternoon. It was the kind of task that required patience and a steady hand and the willingness to be uncomfortable in small ways for a long period, crouching, reaching, working in the precise lines between tiles with a tool that required care. It was also, she acknowledged to herself, exactly the kind of work that her mind needed. The fracture in her rib objected occasionally to her positioning, and she listened to it and adjusted. And the work was slow, but it was good work. And when it was done, the bathroom had a coherence it had been missing. She was cleaning the tools when she heard the voice in the hallway. It was not a voice she recognized. It was a woman's voice, confident, with the specific carrying quality of someone accustomed to being heard, and it was accompanied by the sound of footsteps that were not Thomas's measured tread, but lighter, faster, proprietary, in the way of someone who knew the layout of a house and moved through it accordingly. Lauren came out of the bathroom and into the fourth-floor hallway. The woman was perhaps 50, dressed in the particular understated elegance that cost a great deal of money and was designed to look like it cost nothing. A dark coat, silk at the collar, hair silver and precise. She had Alessandro's cheekbones and a mouth that was set in a way that suggested it had opinions and expressed them. She was standing in the hallway, looking at Lauren with an expression that was assessing in the rapid, total way of someone who gathered information quickly and filed it without sentimentality. "You're the housekeeper," the woman said. It was phrased as the other kind of identification, the same flat certainty as the men on the wet sidewalk, though the tone was entirely different. "Yes," Lauren said. "Can I help you?" "Probably not." The woman looked at her face, the bruise still fading but present, the split lip in its final stages of healing. Something moved in her expression. "You're the one they hit." "I'm Lauren Carter," Lauren said. "I don't believe we've met." "We haven't." The woman extended a hand with the directness of someone who had decided to change modes. "Claudia Vitale, Alessandro's mother." Lauren shook her hand. It was a firm handshake, the kind that conveyed assessment and reached a conclusion simultaneously. Lauren met it with equal firmness, which she understood was the correct response. "He didn't tell me you were coming," Lauren said. "He doesn't know I'm coming." Claudia Vitale said this with the serenity of a woman for whom surprise visits to her son's home were an established and acceptable practice. Where is he? The study, I believe. Third floor. Thomas will have told him by now. Claudia looked at Lauren with the continued unsubtle assessment she had not stopped performing since Lauren had come out of the bathroom. How bad is the rib? Healing. Marchetti's good. Alessandro uses him for everything. She paused. Alessandro sent for Marchetti within the hour. Yes. For a housekeeper he's had for 11 months. Lauren looked at her steadily. Yes. Claudia Vitale held her gaze for a moment longer. Then something in her expression shifted. Not warmth exactly, but a recalibration. The assessment reaching a provisional conclusion. He sent for Marchetti within the hour, she said again, but differently this time. Not as an observation, but as a statement of evidence, and the evidence was leading somewhere. Mrs. Vitale, Lauren said, I'm not sure what you're asking. I'm not asking anything, Claudia said. I'm telling you I notice things. I've been noticing things about my son for 41 years, and I'm good at it. She paused. He hasn't had anyone in this house in 3 years. I mean, anyone. Not the way you mean. She looked at Lauren's face. He called me last night. Lauren stilled. He told me about the attack, Claudia said. He told me about the Rivera situation, how he'd handled it. He told me you'd stayed. She paused. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. I'm recovering from a rib fracture, Lauren said carefully. He offered the room while I healed. Yes, Claudia said. That's what he said. She looked at Lauren with those eyes that were Alessandro's eyes in a different face, the same precision, the same quality of seeing past the presented surface to the thing beneath it. He also said you'd reorganized the supply closet while recovering from a rib fracture. The system needed improvement. He laughed when he told me that, Claudia said. He actually laughed. She said it with the particular weight of a mother reporting something significant, not with sentimentality, but with the precision of someone marking a data point that mattered. My son does not laugh often, Miss Carter. He smiles occasionally when he allows it. He doesn't laugh. Lauren looked at the hallway between them. She thought about the kitchen at 6 in the morning, and the corner of his mouth moving in the direction adjacent to a smile, and she thought about the grout is yours, and about how the words had landed in her chest with a warmth that she had not catalogued accurately at the time because she had not been ready to. I don't know what you want me to say, Lauren said. I don't want you to say anything, Claudia said. I wanted to see you. Mothers do that. We need to see things. She looked at Lauren for a final moment. You're careful, she said. You measure everything. I can see it in how you stand. A pause. Don't measure this one to death. Then she walked past Lauren down the hallway toward the stairs with the unhurried authority of a woman navigating her own territory, and Lauren stood in the 4th floor hallway with her cleaning tools and her fading bruise and the grout pen in her hand, and she thought about measuring things to death and about the specific loneliness of a calculation that was always correct and never warm. Amoshiets. She heard them from the library later that afternoon. Claudia and Alessandro in the study, the door not quite closed, the voices not carrying words but carrying tone. His, contained, with an undertone she hadn't heard before. Something younger than his usual register, something that existed only in that specific relational territory of adult children with parents who still held some version of their earlier self. Hers, warm, persistent. The warm persistence of a woman who had been navigating her son's defenses for 4 decades and had learned every route. Lauren was not listening. She was in the library with her book, close enough that sound traveled, and she was aware of the conversation without tracking its content. She noted the length of it, nearly 2 hours. She noted the quality of it, genuine, not managed. She noted that at one point there was a pause that lasted long enough to suggest that something significant had been said. She read her book, or she held it and turned pages at intervals that did not necessarily correspond to reading. When Claudia left, she passed the library doorway. She stopped. Lauren looked up. "He'll be up in 10 minutes, Claudia said. Her voice was different than it had been in the hallway, easier, with whatever had happened in the study having resolved something. He's going to pretend the conversation didn't affect him. He's very good at that. I know, Lauren said. Claudia looked at her. Yes, she said. I imagine you do. She looked at the book in Lauren's hands and at the room and at the particular quality of Lauren occupying it, and something in her expression was, for just a moment, openly glad. Good night, Miss Carter. Good night, Mrs. Vitali. She left. Lauren listened to her footsteps descend the stairs, and then the house's sounds resumed their ordinary texture. Alessandro came to the library in 12 minutes, not 10. He stood in the doorway and looked at her, and she looked back at him, and neither of them said anything about the 2-hour conversation she had not quite been listening to. He sat in his chair and picked up Meditations and opened it. His posture was entirely controlled. But she had been in this house for 4 days in close quarters, and she was learning his register, and she could see, in the small tension at the base of his jaw, in the particular way he was holding the book, that something had moved in him. They sat in the library until the light faded. At some point he looked up from his book and said, She's impossible, my mother. She seems very clear-sighted, Lauren said. He looked at her. That's a diplomatic answer. I thought so. He looked back at his book. A pause. She liked you, he said. The way he said it was careful, the deliberate flatness of someone conveying something that matters without letting the mattering show in full. She barely spoke to me, Lauren said. She barely speaks to anyone, he said. What she does is look. And then she decides. He paused. She decided. Lauren held her book and looked at the page she wasn't reading. What did she say? She asked. In the study. He was quiet for a moment. That I've been running this organization since I was 28 years old, and I've never once made a decision based on what I actually wanted, he said, as opposed to what the organization required, or what my father would have done, or what the situation demanded. A pause. She said it's time to learn the difference. Lauren absorbed this. She thought about what it meant, a man of 41 who had spent his adult life in the machinery of an inherited world, making decisions that were imposed by necessity rather than chosen from desire. She thought about her own version of this, her own life organized around requirement, around the debt and the survival and the work. And she thought about how the two of them were not, in this particular way, so different. Is she right? Lauren asked. He looked at her over the top of his book. His eyes were very direct in the library's evening light, and they were doing the things she had come to associate with the specific moments when he was not performing control, but simply inhabiting it. The thing that was not softness, but was honest. Yes, he said. She usually is. Lauren looked at the window. The city outside was moving into night, lights coming on in the buildings across the way, the street below shifting into its evening configuration. She had been in this house for 4 days. She had a fractured rib and a fading bruise and a conversation that had been accumulating since a Tuesday night's rain, and she was beginning to understand that some things didn't respond to measurement, that some things required you to simply step into them and trust the surface. She thought about what it would mean to stay. Not just this week, not just until Marchetti cleared her, but in the actual full-weight sense of the word, to stop performing invisibility, to stop calibrating her presence against the risk of her own need, to be in this house and this life, and with this man in a way that was real. The cost was real. She knew this. Real things had real costs. They required your actual presence, your actual self, not the carefully managed version you deployed for safety. But Lauren Carter had been paying costs her entire life. She knew how to do it. The question was whether this particular cost came with something she hadn't had before. The thing that made costs bearable and sometimes even worthwhile. She looked at Alessandro Vitale in his chair with his book in the fading light, and she thought about him calling his mother at night, and about him laughing when he told her about the supply closet, and about the grout is yours in the kitchen at 6 in the morning. She thought, this is the thing. This is what it looks like when it's real. She did not say any of this aloud. She went back to her book, and he went back to his, and the library held them both in the last of the day's light, and outside Manhattan moved through its evening purposes, indifferent and eternal, and somehow, from inside this room, completely manageable. Neither of them spoke again for a long time, but the silence was the kind that contained things rather than the kind that was empty. And Lauren Carter, who had spent 20 years learning the difference between those two kinds of silence, knew exactly which one this was. Marchetti cleared her on a Friday. He came in the morning, as he had the previous Tuesday, with his bag and his precise manner, and he pressed 2 fingers along her left side with the careful attention of a man who understood what he was feeling for. And he said, "Another 2 weeks of modified activity. Nothing that requires significant torso rotation or lifting above shoulder height." He paused. "The fracture is healing well, faster than average." "I've been careful," Lauren said. He looked at her over his glasses with the expression of a doctor who had seen her reorganizing the supply closet on his second visit and had chosen not to comment at the time. "Yes," he said, "exceptionally careful." Alessandro was in the study when Marchetti came to report. Lauren heard the brief conversation through the partially open door, the doctor's professional summary, the pause that followed, and then Alessandro's voice asking a single follow-up question about timeline that told her he had been tracking this with the attention he applied to everything that entered his operational awareness. She had become, at some point in the past week, something that fell within his operational awareness. She was still deciding how she felt about that. She suspected she felt, beneath the practical reservations she could articulate, something that did not have a clean name but was in the neighborhood of grateful. She went back to full duties on Monday. The return to full duties was not the restoration she had imagined it would be during the difficult first days. The return to the clean geometry of work and purpose, and knowing exactly what she was there to do. It was that, but it was also different. The house felt different to move through, or rather, she moved through it differently. Not with the careful erasure of her own presence, but with a kind of settled ownership of her own occupancy. She cleaned the entrance foyer and arranged the flowers and attended to the mahogany banisters, and she was aware, in a way she had not been before, of what it meant to care for a space you were also, in some evolving sense, a part of. Sophia noticed. Sophia noticed the way women who paid attention to other women noticed, without ceremony, without announcement, just a shift in how she positioned herself in Lauren's vicinity, more adjacent, more willing to let conversation happen. On Tuesday afternoon, while they were both working the 3rd floor, Sophia said, without looking up from what she was doing, "He came to the 2nd floor every night, while you were resting, just to the hallway, didn't knock, just stood there for a minute and then left." Lauren was quiet. "I have the late shift," Sophia said. "I saw him 3 times. A pause. "I didn't say anything because it wasn't my business, but I thought you should know." Lauren absorbed this information with the care of someone receiving something fragile. She thought about Alessandro standing in the hallway of the 2nd floor in the specific quiet of the house after 9, and she thought about what that meant, what it said about a man who was controlled and precise and who made decisions based on necessity rather than desire, that he had stood in a hallway outside a closed door 3 times without knocking. The not knocking felt important. It felt like the action of someone who was learning, slowly and without a map, how to be in the vicinity of something he wanted without yet knowing how to ask for it. "Thank you," Lauren said. She meant it. Sophia nodded, the way women nodded when they had said the important thing and could let the rest go. The Thursday of that week, 11 days after the attack, the second complication arrived. Lauren was on the ground floor attending to the sitting room at the front of the house when she heard the voices in the entrance foyer. Two men she didn't know, speaking with Thomas in the specific clipped register of people delivering information rather than having conversations. She heard Alessandro's name, heard the word meeting and the word tonight, and a name she didn't know, Caruso. The name landed with a specific weight that she could feel even from the next room, the weight of a name that meant something to everyone who heard it. She continued working. She had gotten very good at working and listening simultaneously without letting either suffer, which was perhaps a skill she had developed in 11 months of being invisible in rooms where important things happened. The men left. Thomas came through the sitting room doorway 5 minutes later, and he stopped when he saw her. Thomas had always treated her with the distant, professional courtesy he extended to all the household staff, not unfriendly, not warm, precisely appropriate. But something in how he looked at her had shifted in the past 2 weeks. The same shift she had noticed in Sophia and Ray and even in Marcus's particular form of austere cordiality. She had moved, in the household's perception, from background to figure. She was still learning how to stand in the foreground. "Miss Carter," Thomas said. "Is something happening tonight?" she asked. He looked at her. The brief assessing pause of someone recalibrating what information was now appropriate to share. "Mr. Vitale has a meeting," he said. "It's been arranged on short notice. Dominic Caruso is coming." The name again. She watched Thomas's face when he said it, the careful professional neutrality that contained within it a precise kind of tension. "Who is Caruso?" she asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then, with the manner of someone making a considered decision about disclosure. "He's one of 5 men whose agreement matters for the organization's stability. He and Mr. Vitale have had a complicated relationship. Mr. Caruso has not been to this house in 3 years. A pause. "He's coming tonight because of the Rivera situation. He's coming to assess how Alessandro handled it," Lauren said. Thomas looked at her. "Yes. And his coming here, the house, that's significant. When Mr. Caruso comes to you," Thomas said, "it means he's decided the matter is important enough to address directly rather than through intermediaries. That can mean several things." He stopped there, in the way of someone who had said enough. Lauren understood several things. "Thank you, Thomas." "Of course," he said. And then, with a small deviation from his usual precision, "Mr. Vitale has been—" He stopped, reconsidered. "He's been managing this with particular care," he said, "more care than he typically shows with Caruso. I thought you should know that." He left before she could respond. She stood in the sitting room with her cleaning cloth and she thought about what Thomas had just done. The small, deliberate act of keeping her informed. A person who kept records of conversations deciding to include her in one. She thought about what it meant that the people in this house had begun to treat her as someone worth keeping informed. She thought about Alessandro managing the Caruso meeting with particular care, and she thought about the conversation in the kitchen at 6 in the morning. "I have inherited a world that runs on specific rules," and she thought about what it cost a man to operate within those rules while simultaneously being in the process of wanting something different. She finished the sitting room. She went upstairs. She stood for a moment at the window of the housekeeper's room. She had been sleeping there still, the return to her apartment deferred for reasons she had stopped examining too closely, and she looked at the street below and thought about what she was going to do. Then she went to the kitchen and found Diane and asked her what was being served tonight. Diane looked at her with the expression of a woman who had been absolute sovereign of her domain for 16 years and was encountering an unprecedented situation. "What?" "The dinner meeting tonight," Lauren said. "I want to know what's being served and whether you need help with preparation." Diane looked at her for a long moment. She was a compact woman in her late 40s with the specific authority of someone who had been excellent at something for a long time and knew it. Mr. Vitale has never had household staff involved in his business meetings, she said. I know, Lauren said. I'm not suggesting involvement in the meeting. I'm asking if the dinner is covered. Diane studied her. She had the rapid, complete assessment quality of Claudia Vitale, Lauren thought. Both of them were women who gathered data quickly and reached conclusions without sentimentality. You've eaten his food, Diane said finally, not just served it. I've noticed what he eats and what he doesn't, Lauren said. When he's preoccupied, he doesn't eat properly. He drinks more coffee than he should and he forgets about the food. Diane was quiet for a moment. Caruso likes Sicilian preparation, she said. Old style. Mr. Vitale knows this. He asked me this morning to do the braised lamb. It takes 4 hours. Do you need the kitchen clear? Lauren asked. I always need the kitchen clear. A pause. You can stay if you're useful and silent. Lauren stayed. She was both. She spent the afternoon in the kitchen with Diane in a collaboration that did not announce itself as such. She did what was needed without being asked, anticipated the points where a second pair of hands made a process more efficient, and stayed out of Diane's way in the specific manner of someone who understood the geography of another person's expertise. Diane, for her part, operated with a slightly too precise awareness of a person who was pretending not to be watched while watching. At 3 in the afternoon, while Lauren was reducing a stock at the secondary burner, Diane said, without particular inflection, "He's better when you're around." Lauren did not look up. "I've only been back on full duties 4 days." "I mean, in general," Diane said. "Since..." She made a small gesture that encompassed everything. "He eats. He's in the house more in the evenings instead of wherever he usually is. He was in the library last night until midnight." She paused. "He's never in the library until midnight." Lauren stirred the stock. The kitchen was warm and fragrant and had the specific quality of a space being used for its exact intended purpose. And she thought about Alessandro in the library until midnight, and about herself in the housekeeper's room 2 floors up, and about the distance between those two things, and how it was both very small and enormously significant. "Diane," she said. "Yes." "Was there anyone?" "Before. 3 years ago." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. The stock simmered. Something shifted in Diane's posture, the careful shift of someone moving around a piece of furniture that had sharp edges. "Her name was Elena," Diane said. "She was not in the household. From outside. A different world entirely." A pause. "She left because of what this world is, what it requires." Another pause. Longer. "He let her go without asking her to stay. I've always thought that was the thing that..." She stopped. "He's been very careful since then, about what he lets himself want." Lauren absorbed this quietly. She thought about a man who had let someone leave without asking her to stay, and about what that cost. The specific practiced cost of deciding that what you wanted was not something you were entitled to pursue. She thought about learning to navigate a landscape rather than choosing it. She thought about particular care. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Diane said. "I didn't tell you anything." She turned back to the lamb. "The stock needs another 15 minutes. Hutch. Caruso arrived at 7:30. Lauren was on the second floor when she heard the cars, 2 of them, coordinated, the specific sound of an arrival that had been arranged rather than happened. She heard Thomas at the door, heard the exchange that was formal and brief, heard the footsteps that moved toward the dining room. She stayed on the second floor. She had told herself she would stay on the second floor, and she was keeping that commitment, because there was a line between being present in a house and inserting herself into things that were not hers to insert herself into, and she understood that line. She heard the dinner, the sounds of it, the movement of staff, the opening and closing of the dining room door, the low undercurrent of voices that did not carry content but carried tone. She was in the housekeeper's room reading, or holding her book in the position of reading, when she heard the tone of the conversation shift. She couldn't hear words, but tone, carried through walls and floors, and the specific acoustics of a house she knew in every detail, was something she could read. And the tone shifted from the controlled formality of a dinner with a powerful guest to something tighter, more compressed, the kind of sound a conversation made when it was approaching something difficult. She set her book down. She did not go to the door. She sat on the edge of the bed and she listened to the muffled sound of what was happening 2 floors below. And she thought about Thomas saying he's been managing this with particular care, and about what particular care looked like in a room with a man named Caruso. The dinner ended earlier than she expected. She heard the movement of departure, the specific orchestrated choreography of guests leaving, cars being brought, the measured sounds of a house returning to its own rhythm. She heard Alessandro's voice in the entrance foyer, very controlled, saying the formal things that were required. She heard the door, then silence. Then footsteps on the main staircase. Not Thomas's measured tread, not any of the household staff. Alessandro's footsteps, which she had learned over the past 2 weeks, the way she had learned the footsteps of people who lived in the same space, coming up one flight, then another. He knocked on the housekeeper's room door. She was at the door in 3 seconds. She opened it. He was still in his dinner clothes, dark jacket, no tie anymore. The collar open in a way that suggested the tie had been removed with some decisiveness at some point in the recent past. His face was controlled, but she could read it now in the way she had learned to read it. The jaw tension, the particular quality of his eyes when something had cost him. Something had cost him tonight. "Can I come in?" he asked. She stepped back. He came in and stood in the room's middle and looked at the window. She did not turn on the lamp. The room had the ambient glow of the street below, sufficient for reading faces in. "Caruso," she said. "He came to verify," Alessandro said. His voice was even. "The Rivera situation. How I handled it." "And?" "And he had opinions about the manner of handling." A pause. "Caruso represents an older way of thinking about certain situations, about what constitutes an appropriate response." Lauren understood. "He thought you should have done more to Rivera." "He thought I showed—" Alessandro paused, choosing the word with the care of someone who had been hearing it used against him all evening. "Restraint. That he found impractical. That he found, in his phrasing, characteristic. Meaning he expected it. Meaning he's been watching me make choices he finds too measured for some time, and he chose tonight to say so formally." A pause. "He brought 2 of the others with him. Not physically, through their absence. He told me they share his concerns." Lauren was quiet. She looked at his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the way he was holding himself slightly forward, the containment of someone who had been in a room where something had been laid on the table and was still carrying the weight of it. "What does that mean?" she asked. "Their concerns." "It means they are watching to see whether the choices I make are the choices of someone who can hold what my father built." A long pause. "Or whether they need to reconsider their arrangements." The room was very quiet. Lauren looked at the street below. A cab, a couple walking close together against the cold. A city that did not know or care about the conversations happening in the rooms above it. "Are you afraid?" she asked. He turned to look at her. It was the question she would not have asked 3 weeks ago, the question that required both the asking and the receiving to be operating beyond their professional categories. He held her gaze. "No," he said. "I'm angry. There's a difference." A pause. "I made the right choices with Rivera. I know this. Caruso's way, the way he wanted it handled, costs more than it saves. Not in his accounting, but in mine." He was quiet for a moment. "In mine. What does that mean, your accounting?" He looked at her steadily. There are men under my authority who have wives and children, men who make choices based on what I've told them the rules are. If I change those rules to satisfy Caruso, if I become what Caruso wants me to be, every man in my organization understands that the rules shift based on external pressure. A pause. You create chaos when rules shift arbitrarily, and chaos costs more lives than discipline does. Lauren absorbed this. She thought about the thing he had told her in the kitchen, about choosing, within the rules, what he was willing to do. She thought about the men from Rivera's crew who were alive because he had chosen that, and about what it meant to hold that principle against the pressure of a man like Caruso. "You're not going to change," she said. It wasn't a question. "No." "What will Caruso do?" "He'll watch, he'll wait, he'll look for a situation where my choices appear to have cost something visible, and he'll use that as his evidence." A pause. "That's the game. I've been playing it since I was 28 years old." "And you're tired of it," Lauren said. He looked at her. The expression that moved across his face then was complex, multiple things at once, layered in the way of real emotions that don't have clean labels. "Yes," he said. "I am." A longer pause. "I am very tired of certain things." He said it simply, without self-pity, with the specific honesty she had come to associate with his moments of real disclosure, the moments when the control was not absent, but was simply no longer serving as concealment. She looked at him in the room's ambient light, with his collar open and the cost of the evening still visible in the set of his shoulders, and she thought about Elena, who had left because of what this world required, and about Alessandro, who had let her go without asking her to stay, and about what it meant to decide that what you wanted was not something you were entitled to pursue. She crossed the room. It was 4 steps. The room was not large, and she stopped in front of him with a deliberateness that was not quite the same as her usual deliberateness, because her usual deliberateness was deployed in service of tasks, and this was something else. This was a deliberate choice in the full sense, seen and chosen and made with the complete awareness of what she was doing. She put her hand against his jaw, lightly. The way you place something fragile on a surface, with care, with intention. He went very still. "You let someone leave," she said quietly, without asking her to stay. His eyes were very dark and very direct, and they didn't move from her face. "Yes," he said. His voice was different now, lower, stripped of the control's usual architecture. "I'm not leaving," she said. The thing that happened in his face then was not like anything she had seen there before. Not the small movements adjacent to smiles, not the contained expressions she had learned to read across tables and in hallways and in the kitchen's early morning light. It was something that had been behind all of those things, held back by the long practice of a man who had decided he wasn't entitled to it, and now it was simply present, raw and precise and real. He put his hand over hers, the one against his jaw, and held it there. His hand was very warm. She felt his breath change. "Lauren," he said, just her name, the way he had said it the first time in the library, like stepping onto a surface he wasn't certain would hold, except now there was no uncertainty in it. The surface held. He knew it held. "I know what this world is," she said. I'm not naive about what you are and what this life is. I've been in this house for 11 months, and I know what the machinery sounds like." She paused. "I'm not asking you to be something different." "I know," he said. He stopped. "That's the thing, Lauren. You're not asking me to be something different. You're just looking at what's here." His thumb moved across the back of her hand, a small, involuntary thing. The movement of someone who had been very careful for a very long time and was letting a little of the care go. No one does that. "Your mother does." "My mother loves me." That's a different kind of looking. "And this?" she asked. He looked at her, fully, in the way she had felt him looking at her since the entrance foyer on a Wednesday morning, but without any of the management, without the careful distribution of attention that kept feeling in its proper category. Just looking. "This," he said, "is the thing I haven't let myself have in 3 years because I decided it cost too much." "Does it?" she asked. "Still?" He turned his head slightly, the fraction of movement that brought his lips to the inside of her wrist. A quiet, devastatingly gentle thing. Against her pulse, she felt him say, "No." She did not sleep in the housekeeper's room that night. She slept in his room, in the simple, specific way of two people who had been moving toward each other through 11 months of careful distance and 2 weeks of closer proximity and had finally arrived. Not with fanfare, with the quiet completeness of something that had taken a long time and was therefore exactly right. His room was on the 5th floor, the full floor, his floor, and it had the same qualities as his study, the deliberate, organized surfaces, the bookshelves, the dark colors of a person who thought about their environment rather than accumulating it. It was clean in the way of a mind that needed order to function. She understood this. She thought about her own apartment with its alphabetical shelves and its one small succulent, and she thought about the ways people built the structures of their inner lives in the spaces around them. She woke before he did, which was not unusual for her. 5:15 was a deep habit, and the body did not care about the particularity of the morning. She lay in the dim room and looked at the ceiling and listened to the city below and thought about the accumulated weight of the past 2 weeks. The attack and the fracture in the housekeeper's room and the library and the kitchen at 6 in the morning, and Claudia Vitale saying, "Don't measure this one to death," and Caruso and the hand on the jaw and the 4 steps across the room that had been the most deliberate 4 steps of her adult life. She thought about the debt. $412,000. Still there. Still the landscape she lived inside. She thought about the payment schedule and the careful architecture of her survival, and she thought about the fact that falling, there was no other word for it, and she was done avoiding accurate words. Falling for a man like Alessandro Vitale did not make those things less real or less hers to manage. She was not confused about this. She was not imagining that one thing dissolved the other. She was 34 years old, and she had been managing her own life with complete and deliberate ownership since she was old enough to understand what that meant. And she was not going to stop now because something extraordinary had happened to her. She was going to do what she had always done. Hold both things, the debt and this, the work and this, the person she had built and the person she was becoming. She turned her head and looked at him sleeping. He slept with the focused stillness of someone whose body followed the rules even unconscious. No sprawl, no disorder, but also, in sleep, without the control's constant labor. He looked younger, less like the architecture of his own authority, and more like a person who was tired and had, for the duration of the night, put the tiredness down. She thought about Diane saying he's been very careful about what he lets himself want, and about the particular loneliness of that. The practiced renunciation of desire because the landscape of your life seemed to make desire too costly. She had done it herself. Not in the same way, not with the same specific content, but the same underlying calculation. The decision that what you wanted was a luxury your circumstances didn't accommodate. They had both, it seemed, been wrong about the arithmetic. He woke at 20 minutes to 6. She watched it happen. The specific movement of a person coming back into consciousness, and then the moment of locating themselves in unfamiliar circumstance, and then the moment of recognizing the circumstance as something chosen rather than accidental. He looked at her. The control was not yet fully assembled in his face, and she saw something in the unassembled version that she thought she would remember for a very long time. "You're awake," he said. "I'm always awake at this hour." He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. "How is the rib?" She laughed. It came out of her before she could assess it. A real laugh, the kind she hadn't produced in some time, the kind that surprised her with its own existence. Alessandro, she said, it's a legitimate question. It's a terrible question for the specific moment. The corner of his mouth moved, not adjacent to a smile this time, but an actual one, small and private, and clearly not performed for any audience. Old habits, he said. Your mother was right, Lauren said, about learning what you actually want versus what the situation requires. He turned his head to look at her directly. She's going to be insufferable about this, he said. She already was, Lauren said. She told me not to measure it to death. Good advice, he said, from someone who measured everything. I'm still measuring, Lauren said. I'm just measuring different things. He was quiet for a moment. The room's pre-dawn quality, the particular light before the light, the city's lowest register of sound, held them both. Then he said, with the directness that was his fundamental mode, the debt. She looked at him. What about it? I want to... No, she said, simply, without anger, but with the full weight of a position she had already considered and decided on. Not yet. Not like this. She held his gaze. I'm not... What we are, what this is, it can't begin with that. It has to begin with what's real between us, not with what you can do for me because of what you have. A pause. Do you understand the difference? He looked at her for a long time. She could see him assessing it, running it through the accounting she had come to understand he applied to everything, and reaching a conclusion. Yes, he said. I do. Good. She sat up carefully, her left side noting the movement with its habitual objection. I'm going to make coffee. In my kitchen. You have a kitchen, she said. I make good coffee. These facts are compatible. He looked at her with that expression, the private, unperformed thing, and said, Yes, they are. She got up. She moved through his room with the specific ease of someone who had crossed the threshold of a space and was learning its dimensions. And she was aware of him watching her and aware of not minding, which was itself a piece of information. She had minded once the quality of being watched, of being seen. She had spent such deliberate energy on its prevention. She was done with that particular project. The morning had the quality of all mornings after significant nights, a kind of clarified air. The world looking like itself, but slightly more so. The specific heightened attention of a person for whom some habitual fog has lifted. Lauren made coffee in the fifth-floor kitchen with the competence of someone who understood coffee machines and didn't require instruction, and she brought 2 cups to the table by the window, and Alessandro sat across from her in the early morning light with his own unassembled face, and they drank it in a silence that was the good kind. Caruso will come back, she said after a while. Yes. What are you going to do? He turned his cup on the table. The same thing I always do, he said. The right thing by my accounting, and let the consequences be what they are. You're not afraid of him. I'm cautious of him, Alessandro said. That's not the same thing. He looked at her. Fear makes you reactive. Caution makes you precise. Lauren looked at the window. The city was beginning its morning, the light changing, the sounds shifting gear from night mode to day. She thought about precision and about what it looked like in a man who had built his entire world around it. The precise choices, the precise restraint, the precise decision to let someone leave without asking her to stay, which had cost him something that had taken 3 years to find its way back toward. I want to go back to my apartment today, she said. He stilled. Not, she looked at him, not the way you're thinking. I need to water my plant. I need to get more of my clothes. I need to sit, she paused. I need to see if I still know how to be in my own space and also know that this is real. Does that make sense? He looked at her for a moment, then, yes. I'll be back tonight, she said. The word settled in the room between them. Back, with its specific implication of return. of this being the thing you came back to. She watched him receive it. The small, precise thing that happened in his face when something landed that he had not let himself expect. "I'll have Thomas arrange a car," he said. "I'll take the subway," she said. "It's my city, too." He looked at her with something that was not quite exasperation and not quite admiration, and was very much both. "The train," he said. "Fine, but Thomas, Alessandro, drives you back," he finished. "That's not negotiable." She looked at him steadily. He looked back. This was, she understood, what the negotiation of two people looked like when both of them were accustomed to their own authority. The finding of the specific line where one person's need to protect and another person's need for autonomy reached a settlement they could both live inside. "Fine," she said. "Thomas can drive me back." He nodded. The cup turned one more rotation in his hands, the thinking gesture. Then he said, looking at the window, "I've been running this organization for 13 years. I've made decisions that were—" He stopped. "I've made decisions I don't think about in the daylight. And I've made decisions I'm proud of. And all of it, for 13 years, has been managed alone." A pause. "I don't know how to do this with someone else in the room." Lauren looked at him. "You're doing it right now," she said quietly. He turned to look at her. The morning light was full in the room by now, clear and unsparing, and in it she could see all of him, the controlled surface and the thing beneath it, and the specific, hard-won character of a man who had made difficult choices for a long time and was trying to learn to make them differently, without as much alone. "Yes," he said. "I am." She reached across the table and put her hand on his, lightly, the way she had put it against his jaw the night before. Not claiming, just connecting. The specific warmth of contact between two people who have decided to stop pretending it doesn't matter. His hand turned under hers and held it. Outside the window, Manhattan rose into its Friday morning, relentless, ordinary, indifferent to the lives being quietly, irrevocably rearranged above it. Inside the room, two people sat with their coffee and the specific texture of a beginning, which was not a dramatic thing but was perhaps the most important kind of thing. The kind that was built from all the small, honest choices that preceded it, and that would require all the small, honest choices that followed. Lauren Carter sat in the morning light in Alessandro Vitale's kitchen and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the specific, unfamiliar weight of being somewhere she had chosen. Not somewhere she had calculated her way into, not somewhere she had navigated to by necessity, but somewhere she had walked toward with her eyes open and her hands steady and her full attention on what was real. It felt, she decided, like the opposite of invisible. Thomas drove her to East Harlem that Friday morning in a car that was quiet and warm and smelled of clean leather, and Lauren sat in the back and watched the city move past the windows with the particular attention of someone seeing familiar things from an unfamiliar angle. The street she had walked for years, the corner bodega where she bought coffee on weekday mornings, the laundromat with the broken sign that had been broken for as long as she'd lived in the neighborhood, the block where the trees were older than the buildings and therefore wiser about what the city actually was beneath its surfaces. She saw all of it and felt for the first time the specific doubling of a life that was in the process of becoming something new while still containing everything it had been. Thomas waited in the car without being asked. He was, she was learning, a man of exceptional calibration. He knew when to be present and when to be background in a way that suggested either long training or natural aptitude, and she suspected both. Her apartment was exactly as she had left it, which was obvious. She had been gone less than 2 weeks, and no one had been in it, and Lauren Carter's apartments did not disorder themselves in her absence. The succulent was slightly dry, but not distressed, which was within the expected parameters. She watered it. She stood in the kitchen and looked at the clear counter and the cutting board, and she thought about what it was to be in a space that was entirely her own, built from her own choices, organized by her own hand, testimony to the particular inner life of a woman who had spent years being invisible in other people's spaces. She was not invisible here. She had never been invisible here. This apartment was the one place in the world that had always seen her fully because she had made it in her own image, without reference to what anyone else needed or expected. The alphabetical shelves and the warm lamp and the single succulent, all of it was her. All of it was the answer to the question of who Lauren Carter was when no one was watching. She sat on the couch for a moment, just sat, letting the apartment be around her, and letting herself be in it and not requiring anything from the moment beyond its own existence. She thought about Alessandro, sitting in his kitchen with his coffee and his honest face in the morning light, saying, "I don't know how to do this with someone else in the room." She thought about how that sentence had landed, not as a warning, but as something more like an offering. The specific courage of a controlled man admitting the boundary of his own map. She had said, "You're doing it right now." And he was. They both were. Learning in real time, without a model, the specific geography of two people who had each spent a long time alone, deciding that alone was the appropriate condition for their lives. She thought it was probably going to be difficult sometimes. She thought it was probably going to require the kind of honesty that was uncomfortable and the kind of patience that was not passive but active. The patience of two people who had chosen each other precisely and were going to keep making that choice in the small, daily ways that were less dramatic than a Tuesday night in the rain, but were ultimately what sustained things. She packed a bag, practical things, more clothes, her good book, the particular tea she liked that she couldn't get from Diane's kitchen without asking specifically for it. Her mother's photograph from the nightstand, which she had not brought with her in the initial upheaval of the first days, and whose absence she had felt in the housekeeper's room with the particular sharpness of something small and irreplaceable. She held it for a moment, her mother at 35, laughing at something outside the frame, her whole face given over to the moment completely. Before the illness, before the long years of careful managing. Lauren looked at her mother's laughing face and thought about the 7 years and the $412,000, and about all the love that had been inside that cost. And she thought, for the first time with something that felt like arrival rather than decision, that her mother would have found this entire situation completely, perfectly right. She put the photograph in the bag. She took one more look at the apartment, at the clear surfaces and the organized shelves and the small, exact life she had built. She would keep the apartment. That was not a question. She would water the succulent and pay the rent and maintain the lease, because this space was hers, and she did not give up things that were hers simply because something larger had arrived. But she understood, standing in the doorway with her bag over her shoulder, that the center of gravity of her life had shifted. Not away from herself. Never that, but toward something that included herself and also included another person, which was a different kind of geometry than the one she had been living inside. She turned off the light and locked the door and went downstairs to where Thomas was waiting. The crisis arrived 9 days later. It arrived, as crises generally did, without adequate warning and at an inconvenient time, a Tuesday afternoon, which Lauren thought had a specific irony given that it was a Tuesday night 3 weeks earlier that had begun all of this. She was in the study, not cleaning it. She had developed, in the weeks since the night in the library, a habit of working at the desk on the east side of the room when Alessandro was occupied elsewhere, and she needed a surface for the household management notes she had been reorganizing into a more functional system. Marcus had not objected. The study had simply, gradually, incorporated her the way the rest of the house had. As a fact of itself, someone who belonged in it. She was at the desk when Thomas came to the door. His face was the face she had seen on the night of the cars in the alley, professionally neutral with something underneath it that was not neutral. "Where is he?" she asked before Thomas could speak. "Downstairs, in the secondary office." A pause. "Caruso sent men." She was up and moving before she finished processing the sentence. "How many?" "3. They came to the front door." They're inside. Mr. Vitale agreed to speak with them. His voice was very even. They're not here for violence. It's a formal delivery, a statement of position. From Caruso. From 4 of the 5, Thomas said. A collective statement. Lauren stopped at the top of the stairs. She looked at Thomas. What does that mean? A collective statement from 4. It means Caruso built a consensus, Thomas said, while things were settling here. He spent 3 weeks building it. A pause. They're asking Mr. Vitale to take a formal position on the Rivera's situation, in writing, acknowledging that the response was, he paused, choosing the word precisely, insufficient. They want him to say he was wrong. They want him to say he was weak, Thomas said, which is a different thing. Lauren understood. A written acknowledgement, a formal on-record statement that Alessandro Vitale's response to the Rivera situation was inadequate, would not be a private capitulation. It would be a document that existed in the world and that said to everyone in the organization and beyond it that the 4 of them had found Alessandro wanting and he had agreed with their finding. It was not a request for an apology. It was a demand for submission. He won't do it, Lauren said. No, Thomas said, he won't. And if he doesn't? Thomas was quiet for a moment that was very precise in its duration, long enough to convey seriousness, short enough to avoid catastrophizing. They have options for applying pressure, he said, to the organization, to specific operations, to people associated with the household. The last phrase landed with a specific weight that was not accidental. Thomas had said it carefully, and he was looking at her carefully, and she understood that Thomas, who kept records of conversations and knew exactly what he was saying, had said it for a reason. To me, Lauren said. You are now visible, Thomas said. In the organization's awareness, what you are to Mr. Vitale is not private information anymore. A pause. Caruso knows. Lauren absorbed this. She stood at the top of the stairs in the house she had spent 12 weeks moving through, and she thought about visibility, about spending 11 months practicing invisibility and then choosing deliberately to be seen, about how being seen had costs she had understood in the abstract and was now understanding in the specific. She thought about Alessandro downstairs with 3 of Caruso's men and a demand for submission, and she thought about what he would do. She knew what he would do. He would refuse with the flat, precise authority of a man who had decided what he was willing to do and was not going to recalibrate that decision because of external pressure, even significant external pressure. He would refuse and then he would carry whatever the consequences were because that was who he was. She walked down the stairs. Thomas said quietly from behind her, Miss Carter. I know, she said. I'm not going in. I just need to be close. She stood in the main hall outside the secondary office door. It was closed. She could hear the voices inside. 3 unfamiliar ones and Alessandro's, which was the specific controlled register she had learned to read as his most compressed mode. The voice he used when he was moving very slowly through very difficult terrain. She could not hear the words. She heard the tone. She heard the particular quality of Alessandro's voice when he delivered a position and held it. No elevation, no acceleration, just the flat, absolute certainty of someone who was not going to move. She heard, at one point, a different tone from one of the other voices, something that was not quite a threat, but was the shape of one, the outline of a threat waiting to be filled in. She heard Alessandro's response. She didn't need the words. The tone said, understood and unchanged. She stood in the hall and breathed carefully and thought about what was happening in that room and about what it cost a person to hold a position under sustained pressure, to stand in the weight of 4 powerful men's combined will and say, without performance, without drama, simply, no. She thought about what that kind of holding required, and she thought about how Alessandro had been doing it alone for 13 years. And she thought about what it might mean that he was doing it now, knowing she was somewhere in the house, not watching, not witnessing in the formal sense, just there. The door opened 14 minutes later. 3 men came out. They moved through the hall with the specific quality of people who had not gotten what they came for and were not surprised, as if the refusal had been anticipated, and the coming had been about recording the refusal rather than expecting to prevent it. They passed Lauren without acknowledgement, without eye contact, with the comprehensive lack of attention of people who were looking through her to something else. She met the last one's eyes deliberately. He was perhaps 45, with a face that had been doing difficult things for a long time and wore the record of them. He looked at her, registering her, placing her, understanding who she was in the context of what had just happened. She held his gaze until he looked away. Alessandro appeared in the doorway. He saw her in the hall. His face was still in its compressed register, but something in it shifted when it found her. A small unlocking. The specific quality of a controlled person in the presence of someone they don't have to control themselves for. "You were out here," he said. "Yes." "The whole time?" "Yes." He looked at her for a moment. Then he stepped back into the office, and she followed him, and he closed the door. The office was smaller than the study. A functional room, a working room with none of the study's more personal elements. A table, chairs, a whiteboard on the far wall with numbers and notations that she didn't try to read. Alessandro stood at the window with his back to the room for a moment. The same posture she had seen in the entrance foyer on the morning she had told him about the attack. The held-still posture of a man processing something without letting it show on his face. "They'll go back to Caruso," he said. "Yes," Lauren said. "And Caruso will—" He stopped, turned around. "This is going to get complicated before it resolves." "I know." He looked at her steadily. "They know about you. About what you are. What this is. Caruso will consider it." He chose the word carefully. "Leverage." "I know that too," she said. "Lauren, don't," she said quietly. He stopped. "Don't do what you're about to do," she said. "Don't calculate whether I'd be safer somewhere else. Don't construct the argument for distance as a form of protection. I know that argument. I've made versions of it myself." She looked at him evenly. "It's the wrong argument. They could use you. They could try," she said. "And if they try, we deal with it, together." She paused, letting that word do its full work in the space between them. "I chose this knowing what this world is. I told you that. I'm not going to need reminding." Alessandro looked at her. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the entrance foyer on a Wednesday morning. The full, clear attention of someone seeing past the surface to the thing that was actually there. But it was different now. Then he had been seeing her for the first time. Now he was seeing her as someone he already knew, someone whose particular quality of steadiness he had direct personal experience of, someone whose no meant no and whose "I'm not leaving" was not a declaration of romantic feeling, but a statement of operational fact. He crossed the room. He put both hands on her face, carefully, with the specific gentleness of a man whose hands were capable of other things and who was choosing this. And he looked at her from very close. "You are the most stubborn person I've ever met," he said. "You run a criminal organization," she said. "Your threshold for stubbornness must be quite high." Something broke open in his face then, the laugh she had apparently made happen before, in a phone call to his mother, but that she was seeing for the first time in person. It was brief and real, and it changed his entire face, rearranged it into something younger and more open, and so completely itself that Lauren felt the specific physical impact of it somewhere in the center of her chest. He pressed his forehead to hers. She felt the breath he let out, long and slow and slightly ragged at the edges, in the way of someone releasing a held thing. I'm going to handle Caruso, he said. I know you are, she said. It's going to require, he paused. I'm going to need to call in debts. There are people who owe me, who have owed me for years, who I haven't called on because I preferred to keep the balance undisturbed. A pause. It's going to make things uncomfortable for a period. How long? Months, possibly. There will be movement, shifts in how certain things are structured. He pulled back enough to look at her. Are you asking me because you want to know, or because you're going to be involved? Both, she said. Always both. He looked at her for a long moment. I'm going to need a different kind of operation, he said. Caruso wants me to be my father, to be what the organization was 15 years ago. He stopped. I've been running the same structure for 13 years because I inherited it and it functioned and I was cautious about change. But cautious and correct aren't the same thing. A pause. If Caruso's going to force a reckoning, I'm going to use it. Lauren watched his face as he said this. The particular quality of a decision being made in real time, not announced but formed. The thought finding its own shape as it moved toward language. She had seen this in him before, in small ways. The thinking gesture with the coffee cup, the long pause before a careful answer. This was a larger version of it. What kind of operation? She asked. A cleaner one, he said. Less, he searched for the word. Less feudal. The structure my father built was designed for a different city, a different landscape. I've been maintaining it because that's what I inherited, not because it's the best version of what this could be. He looked at the whiteboard. There are parts of this organization that are entirely legitimate. Import, property, financial services. They're profitable, and they're clean, and they've been subordinated, used as cover rather than developed. A pause. I want to develop them. I want to grow the legitimate side until it's the primary face of what we are. He looked at her. It's a years-long process, and Caruso will resist it. Because it reduces the power of the old structure, Lauren said. Because it reduces his specific leverage within the old structure, Alessandro said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. My father would not have done this. My father believed in the organization as it was because the organization was what he'd built, and questioning it felt like questioning himself. A pause. I don't have that problem. I didn't build it. I inherited it, and I'm allowed to decide it needs renovation. Lauren looked at him. She thought about the conversation in the kitchen. I have inherited a world that runs on specific rules, and about what it meant that he was now, in this room, deciding to rewrite some of those rules, not abandon them. He was not a naive person, and she was not a naive person, and neither of them was imagining that a conversation in a back office resolved the deep structures of a criminal organization. But the direction was different now. The direction was towards something she could see the shape of, even from a distance. What do you need? She asked. He looked at her. What do you mean? From me, right now. What do you need? He was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of someone being asked a question they haven't been asked before in the specific form it's being asked, who is trying to locate an honest answer rather than a managed one. I need you to stay in the room, he said finally, while I think about this. He stopped. Tried again. I've been thinking about things alone for 13 years, and I'm very good at it, and I don't entirely know what it looks like to think with someone else present, but I know I want to try. Lauren sat down at the table. She folded her hands on the surface and looked at the whiteboard. Then think, she said. I'm here. He sat down across from her. He looked at the whiteboard. He was quiet for a moment that was long and organized, the quiet of a mind moving through something with its full attention. And then he began to talk, not performing, not presenting, but actually thinking out loud in the specific way that required trust and proximity and the steady presence of someone who was going to listen without managing the thinking toward a predetermined conclusion. Lauren listened. She asked questions when questions were useful, and she was quiet when quiet was useful, and twice she said things that redirected his thinking in directions he hadn't considered, and once he stopped and looked at her and said, "How do you know that?" And she said, "Debt restructuring uses the same logic. You're describing a leveraged reorganization." And something shifted in his expression that was specific and bright, and was, she thought, what it looked like when a person realized they had found the right person. They were in the office for 2 hours. When they came out, Thomas was in the hall, patient, professional, with the look of someone who had understood the door was closed for a reason and had honored that. "Get me a meeting with Ferrante," Alessandro told him. "And contact the Rossi group. Tell them it's time to revisit the proposal from 18 months ago." He paused. "And I want the organization's legitimate holdings audited. Full picture, current valuation. I need the real numbers." Thomas looked at him with the expression of a man who had worked for Alessandro Vitale for 9 years and was recognizing something new. "Of course," he said. "Timeline?" "Yesterday," Alessandro said. "But today will have to do." Thomas allowed himself a small, precise smile. "I'll start immediately." What followed was not a montage and not a clean resolution. It was, as Alessandro had said, months. It was complicated and uncomfortable, and it required things from both of them that were not simple. Caruso applied pressure in the ways he had available to him, and they were real ways, with real consequences for specific parts of the organization that Alessandro managed with the controlled, precise attention of a man operating in difficult terrain without losing his footing. There were weeks when the house had a different quality. More guarded, more operationally alert, the kind of atmosphere that reminded Lauren of a hospital during a difficult procedure. She moved through it. She did her job. She was in rooms when being in rooms was useful, and out of them when it wasn't, and she learned very quickly the distinction between the two, which was, she thought, one of the more practical skills of living in proximity to a man like Alessandro Vitale. She also, during those months, paid off the debt. Not all of it. That would have required either Alessandro's help or a miracle, and she had been clear about Alessandro's help and did not believe in miracles. But a significant portion. Because Alessandro, who had been reorganizing the legitimate face of his operation, offered Lauren something in October that she had not seen coming, and that required several days of consideration before she gave him her answer. "I need someone to manage the household operations of the property division," he said. They were in the kitchen. They had developed a specific habit of the kitchen: early morning, the coffee and the unassembled faces, and the honest conversations. Not just this house, the full portfolio. 6 properties currently, expanding. He paused. It requires the same skills you have: organization, thoroughness, the ability to identify problems before they become disasters. Discretion. Another pause. It pays significantly more than your current position. Lauren looked at her coffee. "You're offering me a promotion." "I'm offering you a role that matches your actual capability," he said, "which has never been correctly matched in 11 months of cleaning floors." She looked up at him. "I clean floors very well." "You do," he said. "You also restructure supply chains and redesign organizational systems and diagnose structural problems in bathrooms before they become expensive. And you understand leverage and negotiation and the logic of institutions under pressure." He held her gaze. "You are not a housekeeper, Lauren. You are a person who is doing what survival required. Survival now requires something different." She thought about it for 4 days. She thought about the question of what it meant to accept something from him, the care she'd taken about that, the line she'd drawn about the debt, the importance of the terms being right. She thought about whether this was the same category as that or a different one. It was different. She understood the difference. The debt would have been given, an act of power on his part, and receipt on hers, with no exchange of equivalent value. This was work. This was her actual capability, correctly deployed for correct compensation. This was not him solving her problem. This was him seeing her clearly enough to know what she was actually capable of and offering her the context to exercise it. Yes, she said on the fifth morning, but I want the terms in writing and I want them reviewed by someone independent. He looked at her with the private smile. Of course, he said. And I'm keeping Marcus, she said. He stays in his role. I'm not taking anyone's position. Lauren, the portfolio management is a new role. No one holds it currently. I know. I'm just saying. She paused. And I want to talk to the current staff at each property before I restructure anything. I need to understand what's actually there before I change it. He was looking at her with the specific bright thing in his expression that she had learned to associate with her saying something that confirmed a conclusion he had already reached. Agreed, he said. All of it. She took the role. She was good at it. She was, as Alessandro had said, and as she had privately known for some time, more than a housekeeper. She was organized and thorough, and she understood systems and people and the specific intelligence of a space that was being used correctly versus one that was being wasted. She worked hard and she was paid fairly. And by March, 6 months after taking the role, she had restructured 2 of the 6 properties into significantly more profitable operations and had identified a problem in the 3rd that would have become expensive if left another year. By March, the debt was down by $60,000. She told Alessandro on a Sunday morning in the kitchen, and he said good in a voice that was doing something complicated beneath its surface. And she understood that he wanted to say more than that and was honoring her position on it, and she loved him for the restraint. She had started using that word internally first, and then one evening in February when they were in the library and he said something that made her laugh, and she looked at him in the lamplight and thought, with the full, clear attention she brought to accurate things, I love this man. She had held it for a while, not hiding it, just holding it, the way you held something you wanted to be sure of before you set it down. And then, on a Wednesday night in the kitchen, while they were arguing about something inconsequential, he wanted to replace the coffee machine. She thought the current one was perfectly functional. She had said, in the middle of the argument, I love you, and you're still wrong about the coffee machine. He had gone very still. Yes, he said. I know. A pause. Both things. She looked at him. Which one are you responding to? The first one, he said. I've been waiting. A pause. I love you. I've been... He stopped, started again. I have been in love with you since you sat in my library and asked me if I enjoyed the power, and no one has ever asked me that. That was 3 months ago, Lauren said. I know. You waited 3 months. You told me not to measure it to death, he said. I was practicing restraint. She looked at him across the kitchen. The coffee machine was between them, which seemed appropriate. That's not what restraint means, she said. I'm learning, he said. She crossed the kitchen and he was already moving toward her, and they met in the middle with the specific ease of 2 people who had been learning each other's geography long enough to know it without looking. Caruso made his last move in April. It was not the move Lauren had expected, not a direct confrontation, not a formal power play, but something more insidious. A story, carefully placed in specific ears across the organization, suggesting that Alessandro's relationship with a member of his household staff had compromised his judgment in the Rivera situation. That the excessive restraint, the measured response, the refusal to take the harder action, all of it traced back to a woman, a housekeeper. That the organization was being run by sentiment rather than strength. Alessandro found out on a Thursday. He came home from a meeting with a quality Lauren had learned to read as one of his most controlled modes. the stillness of someone who had received difficult information and was moving through the landscape of it very slowly and very precisely. "Tell me," she said. He told her, flat and direct, the way he told her everything, without managing her response, without softening the edges. She listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. She thought about 11 months of invisibility and about what it cost to become visible, and about whether the cost was what she had calculated it would be. She found that it was exactly what she had known it would be, because she had not been naive about what this world was and what being in it required. The cost was real, and she had chosen it. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to call a meeting," Alessandro said. "All 5. In person, including Caruso." "And say what?" "The truth," he said. "That I made the right decision with Rivera, and my reasons were organizational, not personal. That my relationship with you is my own business and has no bearing on my operational judgment. And that if any one of the 5 has a specific objection to the decisions I've made in the past 6 months, I'm prepared to address those objections directly, on the record, in front of all 5 of them." He paused. "I'm not going to apologize for you. I'm not going to minimize what this is to manage their comfort. And I'm not going to let Caruso use you as leverage by treating you as something I'm ashamed of." Lauren looked at him. "He'll use the meeting to consolidate against you." "He'll try," Alessandro said, "but Ferrante won't follow him. And if Ferrante doesn't, the other 3 will recalculate." He was quiet for a moment. "I've spent 3 months quietly calling in debts and building a different kind of coalition. Caruso has been watching the front while I've been working the sides." A long pause. "He underestimated me because he thinks I'm soft. Men who make that particular error generally find it expensive." The meeting happened on a Tuesday. Of course it did. Lauren was in the house. She was not in the meeting. She was on the 4th floor attending to the ongoing project of a bedroom that was being converted for a use she had helped design. A practical project that required her full attention and that she gave her full attention to. She worked steadily and deliberately, and she did not go to the corridor outside the meeting room, because she had learned in these months the difference between being present in a house and needing to monitor everything that happened in it. She trusted him. That was the thing. She had learned, in the specific way you learn things that were true rather than merely believed, that Alessandro Vitale's judgment was sound, and his character was real, and his love for her did not weaken him, but was, in the way real things were, something he carried without losing anything of himself. She trusted that. She trusted him. And so she worked on the 4th floor and let the meeting be what it was. Thomas came to find her at 2 in the afternoon. His face, when she looked up, told her before he spoke. "Caruso is leaving the coalition," Thomas said. "He's taking 2 of his associated operations with him. It's a significant restructuring." A pause. "Mr. Vitale asked me to tell you, it's done. The matter is resolved." Lauren set down the measuring tape she was holding. She looked at the room around her, the work she had been doing, the practical, careful work of converting a space into something more functional than it had been. She thought about the 6 months since the second office and the whiteboard, and "I need you to stay in the room while I think about this." She thought about the debt and the job and the coffee machine argument and the "I love you" in the kitchen. She thought about a Tuesday night in the rain and 2 men on a wet sidewalk and a woman who walked 42 blocks home and set her alarm for 5:15 because that was what survival looked like. "Thank you, Thomas," she said. He nodded, and then, with the particular deviation from professional neutrality that she had come to understand was Thomas's own form of warmth. "He's in the study. He asked that you come when you were ready." She was ready. She went down the stairs, the main stairs, not the service stairs, and she walked through the house that she knew in every detail and every corner and every surface that required 2 passes with the mop and every window that stuck in the rain. She walked through it as someone who lived in it, who was part of it, who had moved from invisible to essential in the specific, quiet way that real things happened, Not dramatically, but through the accumulated weight of days and choices and the honest work of becoming. The study door was open. Alessandro was at the desk, not behind it but beside it, standing at the window, looking out at the late afternoon street. He heard her and turned. He looked tired, not defeated. Alessandro Vitale did not do defeated, but the specific tiredness of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just set it down. His face had the unassembled quality she had come to love most, the quality that was only available to her and to his mother, and to the rare, unguarded moments when no performance was required. She crossed the room. He opened his arms and she walked into them, and he held her with the full, unmanaged weight of a person who had been waiting to do exactly this, and had been doing the hard work in the meantime. "It's done," he said, against her hair. "I know." She felt his breath, the solid warmth of him, the specific geometry of two people who had learned each other's shapes. "Are you all right?" "Yes." A pause. "Better than all right." His arms tightened slightly. "Caruso leaving it's actually what I needed. The coalition restructures. The people who stay are there because they agree with the direction, not because of old loyalty to structures that don't serve anyone." A pause. "It's going to be cleaner." "Cleaner is good," Lauren said. "Yes," he said. "It is." They stood at the window for a moment, him with his arms around her with her hands at his sides, the late afternoon light doing its slow work on the room. Below them, Manhattan was its irreducible self, perpetual and various and indifferent. She looked at the street and thought about the woman who had walked it in the rain and the woman she was now, and she thought they were the same woman. She wanted to be clear about that, in her own accounting. The debt and the work and the careful systems had not been mistakes or limitations or evidence of a smaller life. They had been the architecture of a person who knew how to survive and did it, who carried things that needed carrying and did not ask for help that wasn't offered, and kept going when keeping going was the only option. That woman was not less than who she was now. She was the foundation of who she was now. "I want to tell you something," Alessandro said. She pulled back enough to look at him. "Tell me." "I've been speaking with a foundation," he said, "an independent one. We've been in conversation for 2 months. I didn't mention it because I wanted to know if it was real before I said anything." He looked at her. "Medical debt assistance, specifically for people who've been left with catastrophic costs from..." He paused. "From situations like your mother's, long-term illness, late-stage care, the costs that accumulate when someone is sick for a long time, and the person caring for them is doing it alone." He held her gaze. "I want to fund it, through the legitimate side of the operation, an actual foundation with proper governance that does real work." Lauren looked at him. "It's not..." He paused. "I know you'll say this isn't about your debt, and it's not. Your debt is yours, and I will honor your position on it." Another pause. "This is about the fact that you told me about $412,000 with the voice of someone who had learned to live inside that number because there was no alternative. And I spent 3 weeks thinking about how many people are living inside numbers like that. And I have..." He looked at the window. "I have money that came from things I'm not entirely proud of. And I have a choice about what I do with it. And I want to do something that helps people who are carrying what you carried. Not because of you, because of what's right." Lauren was quiet for a long time. She looked at his face, the specific, honest face of a man she had come to know in the deepest sense, the sense of knowing someone's character rather than just their surface. She thought about the accounting, about what it meant for a man who ran a criminal organization to look at the damage that the world's hardness did to ordinary people and decide to address it, not to resolve his conscience, not to balance some cosmic ledger, but because it was right. Because someone who had the means to change a small piece of the world's cruelty and chose not to was making a choice, and he was making a different one. I want to be involved, she said. He looked at her. In the foundation. In its governance, she said. I know medical debt. I know the landscape. I know what the help needs to look like to actually reach people rather than just existing. She held his gaze. If you're going to do this, I want it to be done correctly. The private smile. I expected nothing less, he said. She laughed, the real one, the one that still surprised her a little with its own existence. He watched it with the expression she loved most on his face, the open one, the one that was only for her. Lauren, he said. Yes. I want to ask you something. She looked at him steadily. The afternoon light was very clear and very warm, and it fell across both of them without favor, illuminating the full reality of what was in the room. Two people who had found each other through the specific accident of a Tuesday night's rain and had chosen, deliberately and repeatedly, to stay. Ask, she said. He asked. She did not answer immediately. She was not a person who answered immediately. She was a person who thought carefully and spoke accurately and did not make commitments she hadn't examined completely. He knew this. He waited with the patience of someone who had learned in the past several months that her deliberateness was not hesitation, but respect for the weight of things. Then she said yes, and the room held it, and the city held it, and the late afternoon light held it, this ordinary, extraordinary moment in a study on East 73rd Street where a woman who had spent years practicing invisibility stood beside a man who had finally looked and said a single syllable that meant she was staying, that she had chosen this, that the woman who had walked 42 blocks in the rain and set her alarm and come back to work had walked her way, step by careful step, into the life that was hers. Outside, Manhattan did what Manhattan always did, moved through its evening without pause, without ceremony, carrying its million lives in all their weight and complexity and improbable beauty. Inside the study, the light shifted toward evening, and the city's sounds came through the glass as they always had, and nothing about the world had changed except the two people in it who had, which was, Lauren Carter knew, exactly how the most important. One honest choice at a time.